Hey guys, tonight we slip into a softly lit Victorian kitchen where the hearth's embers glow like sleepy fireflies, and you lean in to the gentle hiss of milk warming in a brass cradle above the coals. You probably won't survive the shock of how earnestly Victorians worshipped their bedtime beverages, but don't worry, corsets aren't on the menu. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see if your clocks are as confused as a butler on holiday. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You cradle the warm porcelain cup in both hands, its surface radiating a comforting heat that seeps into your fingertips. By the 1850s, most middle-class households proudly displayed a dedicated milk warmer, small metal pot often crafted from brass or silver on their mantel or kitchen shelf, ready for nightly duty. You peer into the spout as pale milk ripples beneath the lamplight, reflecting flickers of flame across faded floral wallpaper. It's almost meditative, like watching a miniature ocean in slow motion. You might even close your eyes and pretend you're aboard a calm ship, drifting seaward. As the milk heats, you catch a whiff of faint smoke mingled with cream. Some households tucked lavender sprigs into the embers beneath the cradle, certain the floral scent would banish nightmares. Though servants grumbled it mostly attracted moths to the pantry. You imagine the footman grimacing as he brushes lavender-scented ash from the china. But the gentle aroma probably did add a soothing note for those brave enough to inhale it. Historians still argue whether these aromatic experiments took root in rural county manners or were the brainchild of London apothecaries chasing novelty. Without modern refrigeration, freshness hinged on ice harvested from frozen lakes and stored in straw-lined cellars. You picture a team of laborers hefting blocks of lake ice on sledges, unaware their chilly cargo would one day enable your midnight sip. If you dropped a single block, the entire estate might wake up with a damp surprise. No one admitted that calamity. Of course, pasteurization wouldn't arrive until the 1890s, so most Victorians relied on ice harvesting and rapid consumption to keep milk from souring. You lean back into a high-backed chair upholstered in velvet, the kind that squeaks softly when you shift. The warming cradle sits on three slender legs above a shallow hearth. Scholars still debate whether cradle designs evolved from humble Scottish cauldron stands or were inspired by elaborate Parisian copper pans displayed in chic salons. You stroke the handle of your china cup, imagining the fine-boned china artisans in Staffordshire, quietly cheering when export orders from England surged. Your gaze drifts to the steamy swirl at the cup's lip. You sip slowly, letting the warmth coat your throat. If only Instagram existed then, Victorians might have flooded their feeds with #milk-before-midnight stories, complete with hand-painted filters. The warmth triggers a cascade of physiological signals centuries before anyone coined the term circadian rhythm. This nightly ritual served as a biological cue that the day's labors had ended. In wealthier homes, milk was skimmed by hand-cranked separators, yielding creamy top layers and leaner bottoms for different purposes. The creamy top often became an evening treat, while the lower-fat milk steamed in the cradle. Some mistook the skimmed version for a genuine health tonic so weak it might vanish in your cup, though they politely drank it anyway. You inhale again, noticing the faint metallic timbre. A tiny number of households daringly warmed milk in pewter cups and Vicks. The metal imparted restorative properties until rumors spread that pewter leached lead and caused dreadful dreams. That gossip persuaded most to stick with porcelain or china, lest they awaken speaking fluent Latin to startled cats. Historians still debate how widespread pewter's use truly was, given the lack of surviving accounts. The flicker of a single candle casts elongated shadows across the room. You imagine exhausted clerks, nurses, governesses, and writers all following this same ritual by the same lamplight long before electric bulbs flickered to life. The act of slowly heating milk, stirring it gently with a silver whisk, and watching tendrils of steam rise became a nightly meditation, a precursor to modern mindfulness exercises. If they'd had tablets instead of tablets, the edible kind, perhaps they would have Googled how to fall asleep fast right alongside you. You stir the milk once more, the spoon carving lazy concentric rings. Perhaps the dinner guests of Dickens himself lingered here an extra moment, lulled by the hush of the warmed drink, plotting their own literary masterpieces or, at least, polite gossip about the latest opera. Advertisements in mid-century women's periodicals routinely claimed warm milk eased insomnia, encouraging readers to adopt the practice nightly. The soft glow of print promised relief, and housewives complied. Faith unshaken. As the cup empties, you feel a gradual heaviness settling into your limbs. Night has already draped its velvet over the streets outside, and the hearth embers have dimmed to dull coals. Don't leave your cup too close to the open window, or a passing cat might claim it as its own midnight snack. Head nodding, you realize the simple warmth, the gentle aroma, the smooth texture all conspire to coax you toward drowsiness. Scholars still argue whether the slight tryptophan content in milk or the comforting ritual itself was the true sleep aid. In this moment, you're more than a spectator. You're part of an unbroken chain of weary souls who turn to milk before lights out. This nightly communion with history reminds you that sometimes the oldest remedies remain the most soothing. As you stand and stretch, the kettle cool and silent, you carry that quiet warmth deep within, a gentle ember ready to glow in your dreams. You wander out of the dim kitchen and onto a dukist meadow where low mist coils around the tall grasses like a sleepy cat, and the first pale light of dawn teases the horizon. You probably won't survive the shock of how meticulous Victorian estate managers were about their dairy herds, but here you are, boots sinking slightly into damp earth as you approach a line of contented cows grazing beneath an ancient oak. By mid-19th century, large country estates in England and Scotland routinely housed dozens of Holsteins, Jerseys, and Ayrshires specifically for the evening milk ritual. Mainstream fact: selective breeding programs for dairy herds had already begun by the 1830s, with landowners exchanging prize-winning bulls and cows at agricultural fairs to boost milk yield and quality. You crouch to inspect the dew-laden clover, imagining how these bovines spent their days nibbling wildflowers and lazing under shade, destined to become your next nightcap. Fringe tidbit: some enterprising farmers outfitted their favorite cows with little bells carved from horn, believing the gentle tinkle as they walked improved milk flavor through sound infusion, though neighbors complained the odd melody was more unsettling at midnight than soothing. Historians still argue whether acoustic seasoning truly influenced dairy taste or served as a whimsical excuse for estate owners to gild their herds with more bells than sense. A herdsman appears, his breath visible in the crisp morning air, carrying a leather bucket and a soot-streaked stool. You watch as he beckons a cow named Marigold, whose glossy coat gleams silver in the dawn light. She ambles toward him with surprising docility, head low, as he slides the stool beneath her and positions the bucket just so. A muted joke crosses your mind. If only Marigold got paid an extra clover for her services, she might demand a raise by next week, though she seems content enough chewing cud all day. As he works, the herdsman murmurs to her in a hushed tone, sharing farm news and gossip about the upcoming harvest carnival. You might roll your eyes at this anthropomorphic chatter, but locals swear conversational cows yield sweeter milk. An oddity scholars still debate. Given the lack of empirical studies on bovine mood and lactose content, the man's practiced hands coax thick, creamy milk into the pail in slow, rhythmic pulses that match the heartbeat of the estate itself. Side note: a well-trained cow could produce a full bucket of milk in under 10 minutes, an efficiency that made late-evening chores brisk, even in chill winds. You rise to follow him along a narrow dirt track bordered by hedgerows alive with blackbirds, the scent of freshly turned soil mingling with traces of hay. Along the way, he points out that estate's water troughs, creatively capped with boiled lavender and rosemary to discourage algae while scenting the herd's water source. Fringe detail: a handful of avant-garde gardeners planted licorice root near troughs, believing its sweetness would trick cows into drinking more, in turn boosting milk yield. Though many dismissed this as fanciful herbalist nonsense, historians still argue whether such botanical experiments were widespread or confined to eccentric landed gentry. You pause at a rustic stone barn with heavy oak doors, carved by local woodworkers in wavy vine-like patterns. Inside, shafts of soft morning light filter through tiny square windows, illuminating neatly stacked hay bales and a row of sturdy milking stools. The air smells of straw manure and something you might call earthy nostalgia, tickling your nose like a distant memory. Mainstream fact: by the 1860s, many estates adopted specialized dairy wings within barns, separating milking areas from livestock stalls to reduce contamination and improve sanitation. An early nod toward what would become modern dairy hygiene practices. The herdsman leads you to a small stone trough filled with lukewarm water. He rinses Marigold cider gently, wiping away stray bits of straw and ensuring no grit spoils the evening's brew. You notice he uses a cloth steeped in warm milk to calm the cow's skin, a soothing balm that also prevents bacterial growth. It's a detail that feels remarkably advanced for its time, hinting at the scientific curiosity brewing in rural backwaters. Historians still debate which early texts inspired these hygiene practices. Was it farmers' folklore passed down generations, or the published essays of progressive agronomy? Outside the barn, you watch other herdsmen tend to younger heifers, branding them with small leather tags to track lineage and milk production records. A meticulous ledger sits on a nearby wooden ledge inked in copperplate script, listing daily yields to the nearest pint. A light joke offers itself. Imagine if your sleep tracker updated your diary in such elegant handwriting, though. It would probably judge you harshly for those nightly snack runs. You follow the herdsman back across the meadow just as a ribbon of pale pink light crowns the oak's highest branches. The crew pauses by a trough of fresh spring water, each cow lowering its head with quiet grace. The sun's touch warms their backs, and you feel an unexpected kinship with these beasts, whose simple contentment births the nightly elixir that soothes countless souls. Fringe detail: certain estates claimed their water source ran through veins of mineral-rich slate, imparting a subtle, earthy undertone that discerning palate swore was key to restful sleep, though skeptics claimed it was merely clever marketing. The herdsman mounts a small knoll where he hefts his bucket, nods his head in satisfaction, and strides back toward the manor's rear entrance. You trail behind, passing vegetable gardens and orchard rows where maidens gather eggs and pick early gooseberries for morning tarts. The rhythmic click of wooden wheels and distant clatter of tools form a pastoral lullaby. Mainstream fact: many estates synchronized milking schedules with crop rotations, ensuring laborers could shift from dairy chores to field work without missing a beat, maximizing workforce efficiency before the advent of steam-powered machinery. As you near the manor's service wing, you glimpse the dairy mistress, awaiting with more buckets and a scullery maid holding a metal ladle for taste-testing warmth and sweetness, reinforcing that communal collaboration. This network of rural labor, from herdsmen to gardeners to kitchen staff, ensured a near-continuous supply of milk for both morning breakfasts and midnight lullabies. Historians still debate how much of this system depended on unpaid family labor versus paid staff. Given patchy estate records and anecdotal bias in private diaries, you pause at the archway leading back into the manor's warm embrace. Turning to give Marigold and her companions one last pat, they return your gaze with gentle brown eyes, and for a heartbeat, you wonder if they realize their part in this nightly ritual that transcends centuries. A cheeky aside: if cows could text, they'd probably group chat about which stable corner saw the quietest moonlight. You slip inside, the sense of hearth and hay fading as candlelight flickers above polished floorboards. Tonight, as every night, the milk warmed from these very herds will ease the minds of those preparing for the silence of sleep. You step out onto a cobblestone street slick with evening rain, and the warm glow of oil lamps curves around brick facades like sleepy streetwise eels. You probably won't survive the cacophony of clopping hooves and creaking wheels that herald the nightly milk deliveries, but here you are, stepping gingerly aside as a row of sturdy horse-drawn milk floats rattles past, each cart piled high with enamel pails sealed by tin lids. Mainstream fact: by the 1860s, London supported over 5,000 licensed dairies and employed thousands of milkmen who plied these floats from pre-dawn until late evening, ensuring urban households never faced an empty glass. You inhale the mingled sense of wet earth, hay, and fresh milk steaming through metal lids. Fringe tidbit: a handful of mischievous milkmen claimed they'd hollowed out tiny compartments in lid rims to stash thimbles of stout for a cheeky nightcap during the longest routes, though most sworn declarations dismissed this as empty boastful yarns. Historians still argue whether these rogue diversions ever occurred or if they belong to the realm of gin-Satan folklore. You follow the convoy as it creaks into a courtyard behind an elegant Georgian terrace, where a uniformed dairy inspector stands guard beside a rickety wooden table under a flickering lantern. He's part of a new breed of city officials created by the 1858 Metropolitan Milk Act, empowered to sample and test every delivery for purity and safety. Mainstream fact: the act mandated that all milk sold within London's boundaries had to pass inspection for water, dilution, sediment, and adulterants such as chalk and flour. A light joke flits through your mind: nobody ever confessed to watering milk, only to watering down their own stories. The inspector lifts a ladle of milk and pours it into a small glass cylinder, then carefully adds a chemical reagent that clots any foreign starches. You watch the reaction, silent as a cat stalking a mouse. The cloudy swirls forming like tiny galaxies collapsing under gravity. Fringe detail: a rebellious few dairymen experimented with adding sugar beet pulp to mask chalky aftertastes, relying on the reagent's slow reaction time to slip substandard batches past inspectors, though these stunts earned them hefty fines when uncovered. Historians still debate whether the sampling frequency of once per delivery was enough to deter widespread fraud. The milkmen stand in stoic silence, their frosty breaths curling in the gutter air as they wait for the inspector's verdict. You feel the suspense prickling at your neck, like you forgot to wind your pocket watch before crossing the Thames. A joking aside: if they'd had modern lab equipment, they'd probably be texting lab results, not tossing chocolate-laden pails into the nearest drain. But here, under the gentle hiss of lamplight, the procedure feels almost ceremonial. Once cleared, the pails are stamped with a simple P for passed, and a small chalk line around the rim indicates the date. Mainstream fact: daily stamping and dated marking of milk containers became legal requirements by 1863, giving consumers a crude but effective freshness gauge. You notice the pails are arranged on tiered racks in descending order of delivery route. The nearest stops first to ensure milk arrives at doorsteps still warm enough to soothe restlessness. You trail the float through narrow alleys where shutters clang shut and gas lamps sputter in the damp breeze. Each stop brings a gentle knock on a mahogany door, followed by the soft chime of a brass handle as a housemaid in a crisp apron appears, balancing a bread basket in one hand and an empty jug in the other. She nods without a word, dipping the jug into the enamel pail and tilting it precisely to avoid spillage. Her practiced movements make you wonder if she was born with a jug in her palm. Between stops, The milkman murmurs a cheery greeting to a night watchman patrolling the street, while the inspector checks his pocket watch, mindful of his jurisdiction's closing hour. Fringe tidbit. Some inspectors carried tiny diaries in which they sketched caricatures of notoriously slippery milkmen, though official records rarely mention these doodles, fueling whispered speculation. Historians still argue whether these informal sketches influenced who received repeat visits or lenient fines. As you slip ahead to the next terrace, you catch sight of a glass-fronted depot where scores of pails wait under a canopy of ironwork. Enamel signs proclaim purest London milk in looping script designed to lull onlookers into trust. Inside, a team of female samplers in starched cuffs performs routine checks under low electric bulbs, an early merge of public health and Victorian domestic femininity. Mainstream fact. By the 1880s, some dairies employed female assistants for tastings and simple acid tests, marking a gradual shift towards scientific specialization in food safety. The depot harbors a faint echo of rivalry. 3 rival dairy families vie for prestige, each claiming secret methods to enhance creaminess. One boasted of underground cellars, lined with beeswax for ideal temperature control. Fringe detail. A rumor persisted that one family's cellar was haunted by the ghost of a former head dairyman who insisted on perfect pH levels, scaring off rodents but also terrified new recruits. Historians still debate whether these gossip tales impacted consumer loyalty or reflected mere marketing ploys. You slip back onto the street just as the inspector flags the last float for a final skim test. You peer over his shoulder as he measures fat content with a rudimentary centrifuge spin, pause, and a faint separation of cream from the milk below. A gentle joke. Imagine sending a selfie to your boss with your head stuck in a centrifuge. This too is an era of Yet here, under flickering lamp glow, the sight carries a solemn grace. Stationed at the depot's entrance, a young apprentice balances a ledger and a quill. He records each stamped pail's serial number, route destination, and quantity delivered. Mainstream fact. Meticulous ledger-keeping became standard after the 1865 Public Health Act expanded milk inspection to the provinces, creating a template for modern food tracing systems. You raise an eyebrow at the precision. This degree of bureaucratic fervor feels oddly soothing, like knowing someone's charting your progress towards slumber. By the final stop, the inspector pockets his vial, wipes his hands on a worn linen handkerchief, and nods at the milkman. The horses stamp their hooves as though tugging at blankets, eager to return to the yard. You trail behind until the float vanishes into the mist, leaving you alone with the echo of wheels and the soft stink of fresh hay. You stand in the silent street, pails stamped, routes completed, and every household's warm pint waiting behind. Candlelit doors. You might wonder how many nights this ritual saved and how many more relied on it. Historians still argue whether this elaborate system truly eradicated adulteration or merely shuffled impurities out of sight, only to resurface elsewhere. You fold your coat tighter, feeling the reassuring weight of history settle on your shoulders. In this nightly ballet of carts, pails, and inspectors, you glimpse the careful choreography that underpinned every soothing sip you'd savor back in that velvet upholstered chair. A final whisper of humor. Next time you grumble about your grocery delivery ETA, remember these milkmen raced through London's labyrinthine streets by lantern light and hoofbeat, ensuring your cup never ran dry at bedtime. You step into the narrow shopfront of a bustling Victorian dairy merchant, where rows of enamel pails gleam under gaslight and the air smells faintly of chalk dust and stale pastry. You probably won't survive learning how far some milk vendors went to stretch a sterling loaf's worth of profits. Yet here you are, drawn by your own stubborn curiosity. Mainstream fact. By mid-century, numerous milk merchants routinely diluted pure milk with water or mixed in substances like starch and chalk to increase volume. A practice so rampant that the 1858 Metropolitan Milk Act specifically targeted these deceptions. You approach the counter, where the proprietor, his apron flecked with white powder, offers you a small sample in a pewter cup. You notice the liquid's consistency feels oddly viscous, as if it's wearing an invisible shawl. Fringe tidbit. Certain unscrupulous vendors once added ground rice powder or potato starch to mimic the creamy mouthfeel of unadulterated milk, banking on rural customers' inability to test purity quickly. You swirl the cup gently and detect a barely perceptible grittiness, like the faint crunch of dust in an otherwise smooth loaf of bread. Historians still argue whether these extenders originated as desperate wartime measures during grain shortages or were opportunistic innovations, born purely from greed. The merchant leans forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret from behind the veil of civility. He confesses that chalk pulverized whiting used by artists was prized for its weight and near invisibility when mixed properly. A light joke flits through your mind. Imagine paying for a pint of cream and getting a chalk sculpture instead. The man assures you that a properly balanced blend would slip past most cursory inspections, just enough to pad the profit margin without provoking public outrage. Mainstream fact: laboratory tests by public health officials routinely detected chalk levels upwards of 20% in certain London boroughs, prompting alarmist newspaper headlines about mooncalf milk haunted by its lunar whiteness. You peer behind the counter at a battered ledger, ink blotches obscuring some entries. The merchant explains that dates were often falsified to make older milk appear freshly delivered, with chalk lines around lid rims serving as freshness indicators. Fringe detail: some dairymen devised a crude alchemical test, dropping vinegar into suspicious pails. If fizzing occurred, it signaled chalk adulteration. Yet many vendors learned to pre-treat their chalk with alkaline salts to mask the reaction, a sleight of hand that left inspectors scratching their heads. Scholars still debate just how widespread these countermeasures became once officials adopted more stringent chemical assays. You tiptoe to a corner where sacks of granular white powder sit stacked against exposed brick. Each sack's label is scrawled in fading chalk to mask its true contents. The merchant claims one variety marketed under the innocent name Lactin at patent medicine shops was actually a blend of barley water solids and boiled linseed husk, intended to both bulk out and slightly thicken the milk. A playful aside crosses your thoughts: if only anyone realized Lactin might double as wallpaper paste in a pinch. Despite the fanciful marketing, most consumers remained blissfully unaware of what lurked in their nightly pails. Mainstream fact: by the 1860s, the adulteration scandal ranked alongside contaminated beer and tainted bread as one of Victorian Britain's most common food safety crises. As you wander past an array of ceramic jugs, the proprietor offers a faint smile and recounts a rumored competitor who once tried adding a pinch of ground sulfur to freshen sour batches but inadvertently created an aroma reminiscent of rotten eggs. That vendor's enterprise collapsed overnight, his shop shuttered by outraged housewives. Fringe tidbit: urban legends say the disgraced milkman spent his nights composing penitent odes to pure cream. Though no surviving manuscript has ever been found, historians still argue if this tale is simple folklore or rooted in an actual court record. The proprietor gestures you back toward the counter, where a brass ladle hangs beside a glass cylinder filled with a murky reagent solution. He demonstrates the Metropolitan Milk Act's basic test, adding a drop of reagent to a milk sample and watching for any cloudiness or sediment. You see the liquid thicken instantly, the chemical reaction betraying adulteration in a swirl of tiny bubbles like miniature ghost ships tossed on a dark sea. A wry joke: it looks like your milk just launched a revolt. You realize that despite the theater of it all, these inspections represented early public health efforts to protect the vulnerable children and pregnant women, especially from nutritional poverty. You exit the back door into a small courtyard, where a municipal milk inspector stands next to a wooden cart piled with confiscated pails. He's wearing a dark uniform and a top hat adorned with a small card reading "Inspector of Pure Milk." Mainstream fact: inspectors were empowered to levy fines and impound adulterated milk, and in extreme cases soldiers were called in to destroy tainted stock by dumping it into public sewers. You catch a faint whiff of sewage mixed with sour cream, a potent reminder that the path to purity sometimes lay through less savory channels. Historians still debate the ethical implications of these summary milk destructions. Were they public health triumphs or acts of unnecessary humiliation? Near the cart, a group of curious children peer through the iron railings, whispering about the chalk milk rumor with wide-eyed fascination. Fringe detail: some enterprising urchins swore they could taste the chalk by listening to the milk's sound on the tongue. A hollow slap signaled impurity, while a solid tone meant authenticity. Adult customers often dismissed such tests as fanciful at best, but these streetwise kids earned pocket money guiding sharp-eyed matrons away from suspicious merchants. Scholars still argue whether these informal taste testers played a significant role in policing local markets or simply provided fodder for tavern gossip. You observe the inspector methodically stamping each tainted pail with a broad X in red paint, then tipping them upside down into a wooden trough. The copper sluice gates behind the courtyard rumble open, and a sluggish stream carries the adulterated milk away. A light joke crosses your mind: it's the only time dirty secrets literally flow down the drain. While the spectacle seems punitive, it also served as a powerful deterrent, reminding merchants that public trust could sour faster than milk itself. As you make your way back to the main street, you pass a bulletin board plastered with newspapers screaming headlines like "Milk Madness hits Whitechapel and Chalk Scandal shakes Soho." Mainstream fact: Victorian papers sensationalized such stories to drive sales, often embellishing facts with lurid anecdotes about infant deaths and scurvy-like symptoms caused by nutrient-poor milk. Yet actual reports of severe illness linked directly to milk adulteration remain scarce, suggesting that newspaper editors may have leaned as heavily on sensationalism as some merchants leaned on chalk. Historians still argue whether the public health threat was as grave as the headlines implied, or mostly a marketing battle among rival newspapers and dairies. You pause under a flickering lamppost, holding your empty pewter cup to your lips and recalling the slick, chocolate-laden texture of that first sample. The city around you hums with carriage wheels and distant church bells, but in your mind, the memory of that cup remains. Perhaps it's true that fear of tainted milk drove families to cling more tightly to other bedtime rituals, warm baths, bracing walks, or quiet prayers while savoring every unadulterated sip as if it were liquid gold. A final reflection. The adulteration scandals ultimately spurred reforms that shaped modern food safety laws, proving that sometimes the darkest chapters yield the sweetest outcomes. You slip back into the soft glow of the kitchen, where a low fire crackles beneath a chipped porcelain kettle, and the lingering scent of spiced chalk from last night's milk scandal mingles with the faint sweetness of roasted grain. You probably won't survive hearing how Victorian homemakers coaxed extra sleep from humble barley. Yet here you are, lured by the promise of deeper slumber. You round the corner to find a stout earthenware jug brimming with pale amber liquid barley water blended with warm milk, a bedtime brew that once graced parlors from Bath to Brighton. By the 1860s, barley water had transcended its medieval roots to become a mainstream remedy for digestive woes and insomnia. Mainstream fact. Domestic recipe books of the era routinely instructed readers to simmer 2 tablespoons of pearl barley in a pint of water for 20 minutes, then strain and mix the resulting infusion half and half with heated milk, sweetening lightly with honey or treacle. You watch the mistress of the house ladle a steaming portion into a fine china cup, noting how the liquid catches the lamplight, hinting at the translucent glow of early electric bulbs yet to come. You raise the cup to your lips and inhale the gentle scent of toasted grain mingled with cream. Fringe tidbit. A handful of experimental apothecaries once recommended adding a pinch of ground rose petals or crushed almonds to the simmering barley, believing the floral oils would deepen REM sleep, though most herbalists grumbled that the resulting brew tasted like fragrant wallpaper paste. Historians still argue whether these perfumed variants originated in genteel spa towns like Tunbridge Wells or emerged from the crowded workbenches of London's apothecary shops. As you sip, you feel the faint grit of barley holes against your tongue, a comforting grainy reminder that this drink carries more texture than plain milk. Some Victorians believed that the tiny residue acted as a mild sedative, massaging the throat on its way down and coaxing nerves to unwind. You imagine your own throat receiving a gentle micromassage, as though you'd paid for a spa treatment, and every swallow tracker apps might envy such deep tissue therapy. A light joke flutters. If you spilled this brew on your carpet, you'd have more than just a barley slip to clean up. Across the hearth. The mistress points to an open ledger scratched in copperplate script, where she's noted each evening's ratio of barley water to milk. You stoop for a closer look and see a range of ratios from 1 part barley water to 3 parts milk for mild insomnia, to an even split for guests plagued by more stubborn sleeplessness. Mainstream fact. Medical journals of the late 1870s debated these ratios extensively, with some physicians asserting the optimal blend was 1:1:2, deliver both the tonic properties of barley and the tryptophan boost from milk. You settle into an overstuffed armchair, the barley water cup warming your palms. The kitchen door creaks as the cook emerges, bearing a small saucer of candied ginger. She offers a piece, explaining that the ginger's gentle heat was believed to stimulate circulation without shocking the system, awake a delicate balance for the sleepless soul. Fringe detail. A few bold households experimented with adding a swirl of raspberry vinegar, convinced the tartness would jolt the senses into restful surrender. Though most recipients reported nothing more than a puzzled tongue, you steer the conversation toward the theory behind this barley milk alliance. Early nutritionists praised barley for its B vitamins and magnesium elements, now recognized to support relaxation and nerve function. Yet long before those vitamins bore names, scientists understood. Victorian scholars still argued whether barley's real power lay in its nutritional content or the soothing ritual of stirring and sipping. Historians still debate whether the comfort of routine or the barley itself delivered the ultimate soporific punch. The mistress lowers her voice to share an apocryphal tale. Baroness Lenton of Wiltshire supposedly served barley water mixed with goat's milk to cure her chronic insomnia after doctors failed her. She claimed to drift off within minutes, though skeptics whispered the story grew taller with each retelling. Much like an evening of ambitious gossip, a gentle joke arises. Perhaps the Baroness' secret was not the barley at all, but the goats. Calm bleat reminding her of carefree childhood summers. You circle back to the jug and pour yourself another cup, watching the steam swirl upward like morning mist over a barley field. The kitchen's brass kettle whistles softly, and you realize the sound seems oddly like a lullaby if you listen long enough. Without realizing it, your chest relaxes, shoulders drop, and the day's tension seeps out through your fingertips. The barley grains left behind in the cup settle like tiny stones at the bottom, a tactile endnote to this nightly composition. Beyond the window, you hear the clip-clop of carriage wheels on wet cobblestones, the city's restless pulse continuing, even as you prepare for rest. Yet here, in this corner of soft light and grain-scented warmth, time feels gently slowed. You might wonder if modern smoothie bowls owe their trendiness to Victorian barley water enthusiasts, though you suspect today's avocado and toast crowd would balk at stirring barley holes through their almond milk. A soft cough draws your attention to the cook, who's wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. She confides that in poorer districts, where milk was scarce, households sometimes doubled the barley water portion, sweetening heavily with molasses to disguise thin batches. Fringe tidbit. Urban legends say some families preferred the resulting brew so much they adopted the poor person's barley latte. As a household staple, proof that necessity often sparks its own cozy comforts, scholars still argue whether these working-class innovations influenced upper-crust tastes or remained tucked away behind soot-streaked back doors. The mistress offers a final observation. By the 1880s, packaged barley water mixes began appearing on chemists' shelves, pre-measured and sealed with wax, promising the perfect ratio for dreamy repose. But true connoisseurs sneered at these commercial blends, favoring the time-honored tradition of slow simmering and personal measurement. A light joke breathes life. Nothing says I'm committed to sleep like hauling yourself out of bed to grind barley at midnight. You cradle your cup and feel its gentle weight. The warmth seeps into your chest, carrying with it the day's last nervous tremors. Mainstream fact. Modern research confirms that warm beverages can raise core body temperature briefly before it drops, triggering natural drowsiness, a physiological mechanism unknowingly harnessed by your Victorian predecessors. As you take your final sip, you sense a quiet transformation. The room's edges soften, the flicker of lamp flames slows, and your breathing eases into a steady rhythm. In this moment, you're part of a centuries-old circle of sleepers who entrusted their restless nights to the earthy embrace of barley blended with milk. Historians still debate whether the subtle nutrients or the ritual's gentle cadence held the true key to slumber. What matters now is the soothing warmth pulsing through your veins, guiding you toward the threshold of dreams. You stand, set the empty cup on the hearth's edge, and feel the barley water's legacy hum softly in your bones, ready to lull you into the evening's quiet depths. You return to the cozy kitchen alcove, where the lingering warmth of barley water has just faded and a new remedy awaits. A porcelain jar of honey glinting like liquid amber in the lamplight. You probably won't survive the sweet surrender that Victorians achieved by drizzling raw honey into evening milk. Yet here you are, spoon poised for that first gilded drop. Mainstream fact. By the mid-19th century, British beekeeping had become a burgeoning cottage industry, with many rural households tending hives of hardy Apis mellifera to harvest combs of sweet, golden nectar for both table and tonics. You lift the lid and inhale a heady perfume of wildflowers, heather and the faintest hint of thyme, as though the very essence of summer has been trapped under this snug glass dome. You scoop a teaspoon of viscous honey into a small saucepan, watching it stretch into a long, glistening ribbon before pooling like molten sunshine at the bottom. Fringe detail. Some experimental apothecaries recommended mixing Manuka honey imported from distant New Zealand, colonists claiming its exotic enzymes offered a more potent soporific effect. Though most Victorians scoffed at the idea of paying extra postage for kiwi sleep dust, historians still argue whether these colonial imports ever reached enough households to shape mainstream tastes, or if they remained the fanciful indulgence of a wealthy few. As the honey warms gently over a low flame, you remember that barley water mix from earlier and imagine a triumphant union of all three remedies: barley, milk, and honey. A modern aside drifts in your mind. Today's wellness gurus might call it a sleep elixir smoothie, complete with a vanity Instagram filter and hashtag protests against yawning. But here, under the dance of candle flames, there's nothing ostentatious about this ritual. Just a slow swirl, a thoughtful breath, and the promise of calm. You pour cold milk into the pan and stir with a wooden spoon carved from local oak. The honey dissolves in widening ripples, turning the milk a pale gold reminiscent of dawn's first light. Mainstream fact. Victorian cookbooks frequently recommended a ratio of 2 spoons of honey per cup of milk, asserting that the natural sugars would not only sweeten but also stabilize the milk's proteins during heating, preventing unpleasant curdling. You whisper a joking aside to yourself. If they'd had butts, they might have launched a golden sleep latte complete with commemorative coasters. The scent of honey-warmed milk drifts upward, faintly floral and deeply comforting. You dip a fingertip into the cup and taste the blend, creamy milk underscored by honey's complex notes of lavender, heather, and that mysterious woodland musk each hive imparts. Fringe tidbit. Some beekeepers swore that hives kept near yew trees produced a darker, almost caramel-like honey reputed to calm restless legs syndrome, though critics warned that the very idea smacked of bee-blind folklore. Scholars still debate whether local flora truly influenced the honey's medicinal properties, or if consumers simply projected expectations onto each jar. You carry the cup to a cushioned high stool by the window, propping it on a small saucer that catches stray drips. Outside, the night has deepened to velvet, and you watch pale lamplight refract through rain-speckled panes. A light joke flickers. No barista in a neon-lit cafe could replicate this ambience unless they installed antique lace curtains and hired someone to churn butter on the side. You wrap both hands around the cup, feeling its warmth pulse through your palms. As you sip, you notice how the milk's chill has melted away, replaced by velvety liquid that glides soothingly down your throat. Each swallow feels like a gentle exhale, coaxing tension from shoulders you didn't realize you'd held up around your ears. Mainstream fact: honey contains trace amounts of tryptophan and naturally occurring antioxidants, which Victorian health writers claimed supported both sleep and digestion, though they had no concept of amino acids or free radicals. A modern aside, today we'd probably call those antioxidants sleep spa superstars, plaster their pictures on wellness blogs, and sell 5-star reviews to influencers. The kitchen's warm glow envelops you, a gentle draft stirs the lace curtain, and you imagine drifting through honey-scented clouds. Fringe detail: a handful of eclectic households experimented by infusing milk with honey and a whisper of chamomile tea leaves, believing the floral essences would harmonize for the ultimate lullaby blend, though most guests complained it tasted like a perfumed milkshake gone wrong. Historians still argue whether these botanical mashups originated in genteel spa retreats or among scrappy urban herb gatherers. A soft cough behind you reminds you of the cook who's drying a spoon with a tea towel. She smiles and reveals her own tip: when beeswax combs were crushed into the milk along with the honey, the tiny flecks added a pleasant chewiness and extra calories for nursing mothers. She warns, though, too much comb turned the drink gritty, and guests often pronounced it chewy honey horror. You chuckle at the mental image and tease that perhaps those brave souls had stronger jaws than nerves. You lean back and lift the cup again, thinking about how simple ingredients milk, barley, honey combined to form a nightly rite that spanned classes and counties. Mainstream fact: by 1880, honey milk tonics were staples in women's magazines, recommended for nervous headaches, poor digestion, and even melancholic fancies thought to interfere with rest. A joking aside, they would have trademarked melancholic fancies as a tea blend if they'd known the marketing potential. The final sip lingers on your tongue like a long, sweet sigh. You set the cup aside and trace the honey streaks clinging to its interior, as if reading the lines of a poem that promises gentle dreams. You notice how the kitchen clock ticks more softly now, each second a hushed footstep toward midnight. Historians still debate whether the honey's biochemical effects or the comforting predictability of stirring and sipping granted the true magic. But does it really matter which ingredient deserves credit when the result is the same? A warm glow in your chest and the slow descent into drowsy calm. You stand, the cup empty and your senses mellowed. The scent of honey threads through the air as you blow out the tapers, leaving only the soft hiss of a night-drenched breeze outside. You pause, savoring the aftertaste like a cherished secret, then slip away from the kitchen into the hush of the night, ready to join the legions of sleepers who have trusted honey-sweetened milk to carry them gently into dreams. You follow the faint echo of turning pages down a narrow corridor of the manor's library, where mahogany shelves sag under the weight of leather-bound volumes and gilt-embossed periodicals. A single gas lamp flickers overhead, casting long shadows that dance across the tiled floor like restless phantoms. You probably won't survive flipping through the women's magazines of Victorian England, each page brimming with earnest advice on how to cure insomnia with a cup of warm milk. But here you are, guided by curiosity and the promise of another bedtime elixir. So, before you drift into the pages, take a moment to cradle your own cup of milk and remember those lavender-scented hearths, barley-studded kitchens, and honey-glazed spoons from our earlier wanderings. You settle into a cushioned armchair beside a small writing desk, its surface neatly strewn with copies of The Lady's Companion, The Queen, and Castle's Household Guide. Mainstream fact: by the 1870s, women's periodicals often featured medical columns written by credentialed doctors and apothecaries, offering domestic readers at-home remedies for everything from nervous headaches to sleepless nights. You fan out several issues, noting a recurring column titled Nightcaps and Nocturnes that cheerfully assures readers that warm milk, properly prepared, is the gentlest sedative known to worm LKNT. As you turn the crisp pages, you inhale the soft musk of old paper mingled with faint traces of bergamot oil, perhaps a leftover from fashionable sachets tucked between covers. Fringe detail: a handful of avant-garde editors once slipped in recipes for adding a pinch of dried rose hips to the milk, claiming the tangy fruit's vitamin C content soothed melancholic fancies, though most readers dismissed the idea as botanical showboating. You trace your finger down a recipe, heat 1 cup of fresh milk until steaming, stir in 1 teaspoon honey and 2 teaspoonfuls of powdered barley water, dust with rosehip sugar. The result promised a night of tranquil dreams. You sink deeper into the chair, pulling one leg over the other, and begin to read aloud softly. A embellishment in The Queen suggests heating milk in a double boiler lined with chamomile petals, held in place by a fine muslin cloth, an elegant nod to the lavender sprigs you once watched crackle on charcoal. Historians still argue whether these floral infusions originated in Normandy spa towns or were the creative inventions of London's millinery-connected editors. The very idea of muslin-wrapped herbs steeping alongside milk feels like a bridge between kitchen alchemy and genteel parlor theatrics. One editorial warns against using pewter vessels for heating milk, recalling scandals of lead-induced nightmares. Instead, they extolled china and copper pots, praising the latter's even heat distribution. Mainstream fact. Late Victorian cookware catalogues advertise copper-lined milk boilers with engraved handles and detachable spouts, marketed to upper class households hoping to ward off both sleeplessness and substandard metal dreams. You imagine those gleaming pots on polished marble countertops. A far cry from the simple brass cradle by our hearth. A light joke occurs to you. Modern YouTubers might unbox a vintage copper milk boiler and lament its lack of USB charging. Yet these periodicals treated such cookware as kitchen must-haves, promising uninterrupted slumber for those willing to invest. As you crack the spine of Castle's guide, a recipe catches your eye. Milk and arrowroot sleep potion. It instructs adding arrowroot powder, a thickening agent derived from tropical plants, to create a silky nightcap texture. Fringe tidbit. Some households insisted arrowroot made the milk feel like satin on the tongue, while others griped it tasted like trying to swallow dissolved linen. Scholars still debate whether arrowroot's popularity stemmed from genuine textural comfort or simply mimicking more expensive starches. You pause to sip your own honeyed milk, letting the warmth cradle your throat as you underline passages about portion size. No more than half a teacup. Served just cool enough to sip without scalding. Too hot, and you risk jangled nerves. Too cold, and the drink won't release its soporific vapors. A mainstream fact flickers in your mind. Period physicians often advised consuming the nightcap exactly 15 minutes before bedtime, claiming this window allowed tryptophan to reach the brain before the mind could wander into anxious territory. You chuckle at the thought of scheduling your yawns so meticulously. Turning to the lady's companion. You discover a dramatic flourish. Illustrations of ladies in lace-trimmed nightgowns, seated on velvet chaises, lounges, cups in hand, eyes heavy with repose. Beneath each drawing, a caption reads, "Miss Ingram's recipe for blissful slumber," detailing the addition of a few crushed lavender buds directly into the milk warmer's coals, an homage to the rural lavender trick you once witnessed. Historians still argue whether these charcoal-steeped floral notes offered genuine sleep benefits or merely scented the kitchen to mask less pleasant odors. You trace your finger along a bold headline, "Why Doctors Recommend Dairy Over Laudanum." The article contrasts milk nightcaps with opiate-based tonics, cautioning that laudanum became a slippery slope for delicate constitutions. Mainstream fact. By the late 19th century, medical journals were increasingly critical of opiate prescriptions for non-critical insomnia, advocating for gentler food-based sedatives whenever possible. You tap your lip, wondering how many ailing aristocrats suffered through sleepless nights before women's magazines empowered them to demand milk-based cures. A breezy columnist chimes in with a note of reassurance. Fear not the clinking of crockery. Embrace the ritual of warming milk as a nightly lullaby for the body. Fringe detail. Some etiquette experts advised readers to present the nightcap on a silver tray with a sprig of fresh mintless for mint sleep properties, and more for the dramatic reveal of domestic hospitality. You imagine yourself in a grand drawing room, savoring that tray's quiet ceremony before trundling off to bed in a distant wing. The pages flutter as you flip to the back, where patient letters arrive seeking advice. A governess from Yorkshire complains of restless suffocation and swears by adding a spoonful of condensed milk to boost sweetness on rainy nights. A seamstress from Birmingham requests guidance on heating milk without a proper hearth. Mainstream fact. The proliferation of condensed and evaporated milk in the last quarter of the century extended the reach of these recipes to kitchens lacking fresh dairy, a boon for urban families without immediate rural connections. You smile, recalling the condensed tins that later made their way into midnight pantries across the British Empire. You close the magazine and lean back, feeling the collective murmurs of countless women who dared to believe in the healing power of milk. A soft silence settles as you consider how these domestic publications shaped daily life, blending science, folklore, and gentle indulgence in every recipe. Historians still debate to what extent these articles influenced actual behavior versus serving as aspirational copy for households that rarely owned copper boilers or freshly pressed linens. You rise, placing the magazines in a neat stack, and blow a strand of hair from your forehead as if emerging from a dream. You glance at the clock, a tinkling crystal timepiece that ticks away seconds like gentle raindrops, and realize how easily time slips when guided by these printed lullabies. A final light joke drifts through your thoughts. Perhaps modern sleep apps could learn something from flipping through comforting pages instead of swiping on glowing screens. With one last look at the gilt lettering on the magazine covers, you tiptoe out of the library, your mind fragrant with the echoes of powdered barley, chamomile whispers, and honeyed warmth. The hush of midnight awaits, and soon the soft embrace of sleep will reclaim you, just as it did the countless readers who followed these prescriptions by candlelight. You step into a warm study lined with oak shelves, where the scent of leather-bound medical tomes mingles with the faint aroma of melted tallow from a single shaded lamp. You probably won't survive the surprise that a handful of earnest Victorian physicians treated warm milk as a bona fide sleep remedy worthy of scientific praise, but tonight you'll settle into a velvet-upholstered armchair and learn exactly how they made it official. You pick up a slender pamphlet titled Principles of Healthful Slumber, authored by Dr. John H. Kellogg, whose name you might recognize from cereal boxes rather than candlelit consultations. Mainstream fact. By 1890, Kellogg, then head physician at the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan, had published several widely read treatises on dietetics, in which he recommended a nightly cup of warm milk to promote restful sleep and temper nervous exhaustion. His works crossed the Atlantic, influencing British health writers and lending transatlantic credibility to what had previously seemed a humble domestic custom. You run your fingertip along Kellogg's precise instructions. Heat milk to exactly 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius. Stir clockwise 9 times, and serve in a pre-warmed Jasperware mug to retain optimal warmth. Fringe tidbit: some aficionados whispered that Kellogg's prescribed by the degree approach was inspired by Freemason rituals, 9 being a sacred number, though most critics dismissed this as fanciful speculation. Historians still argue whether Kellogg truly intended numerology or simply craved a memorable marketing hook. As you cradled the pamphlet, you recall the barley water and honey experiments you witnessed earlier. Now you see how physicians like Kellogg wove those domestic rituals into their own scientific veneer. A light joke crosses your mind. If only Kellogg had trademarked his stirring method, he might have sold 9-turn nightcaps alongside cornflakes. You sink back as the lamp's glow flickers over hand-scrawled margin notes by a London physician, Dr. Amelia Fitzroy, who attended the Great Exhibition of 1886 and brought Kellogg's pamphlet home. She praises the milk's tryptophan content, but adds a post-it-style annotation: test with skimmed versus whole milk, observe variance in dream vividness. Fringe detail. Rumor holds that Dr. Fitzroy conducted clandestine sleep trials in her own parish, recruiting local midwives to record villagers' dreams after milk nightcaps, though no formal records survive. Historians still debate whether Fitzroy's trial ever moved beyond casual anecdote. You notice a small brass thermometer resting on the desk, calibrated in both Fahrenheit and Réaumur scales. Mainstream fact. Medical instruments of the period began to standardize heat measurements, marking a shift away from vague warm and hot descriptors toward more reproducible protocols, a hallmark of Victorian scientific rigor. You imagine exhausted patients clutching such thermometers at home, perhaps double-checking their milk's temperature with more fervor than they tested their own pulse. That soft chuckle escapes you as you read Kellogg's caveat: do not add sugar or molasses when precise blood sugar moderation is required. Yet earlier you savored honey-sweetened milk like a guilty pleasure. You picture Kellogg frowning at your saucer of candied ginger, though deep down he probably appreciated that a spoonful of sugar helped brave souls actually drink their medicine. Turn a page to a chart detailing sleep onset times in relation to bedtime snacks: milk, cocoa, bouillon, and even weak port wine. Warm milk sits conspicuously at the top of the list, boasting an average sleep onset of just 19 minutes among study participants. Fringe tidbit: some participants self-reported lucid dreams so vivid they claimed to compose sonnets in their sleep, only to forget them come morning dreams. Historians still argue were real or creative embellishments. You sip from a waiting cup of lukewarm milk placed on the desk, a courtesy gift from the housekeeper, its steady warmth reminding you of that brass cradle by the hearth. The taste is creamy, just faintly sweet, and uncannily soothing. A modern aside nudges your mind: this is basically the OG Sleep app, minus the beeps and Bluetooth pairing. As you set the cup down, you spot an envelope sealed with a wax crest. Correspondence between Dr. Kellogg and Sir William Jenner, who first differentiated typhoid from typhus. Mainstream fact. Such letters reveal that leading physicians shared ideas across specialties, endorsing culinary sedatives like warm milk as part of holistic treatment plans for convalescents. You hold your breath, picturing Jenner himself prescribing nothing stronger than dairy when he could have reached for laudanum. A soft smile forms as you imagine Jenner's staff delivering nightly pails of fresh milk to his sickbed, escorted by stern nurses clutching silver ladles. Fringe detail. One nurse later recounted how Jenner would claim the milk whispered restful suggestions in his ear, a tale scholars still debate as a charming myth or misremembered metaphor. You glance at a small framed daguerreotype on the desk, a trio of physicians in three-piece suits and staunch collars posing in front of Battle Creek Sanitarium. Their eyes, stern yet hopeful, seem to promise relief through measured diet and disciplined routines. You joke to yourself that these men would roll their eyes at today's sleep trackers, but not approvingly at your adherence to Kellogg's stirring protocol. Across the wall hangs an engraved patent for a steam-heated milk boiler co-developed by Kellogg and a Chicago inventor. Mainstream fact. By 1895, such devices were marketed to affluent households seeking the latest in domestic science, complete with built-in thermometers and detachable warming plates. You picture a proud housewife in Essex commissioning one of these boilers. Delighted by the promise of automated drowse, you push back your chair and stand, the decades-old floorboards creaking beneath your boots. The study feels sanctified, a crossroads where home remedy met medical endorsement. The very notion of warm milk as therapy seems absurd until you remember that this was an age enthralled by codified regimens, countless pills replaced by curated diets, and sleepless nights soothed by science cloaked in pastoral simplicity. Before You leave, you scribble a note in the margin of Fitzroy's pamphlet, test edition of Lavender Oil and Cole's Kellogg's Thoughts. A mischievous smile tugs at your lips. Imagining the reaction of a stern doctor confronted with botanical flamboyance, you step back through the study's arched doorway into the hushed corridor, pamphlet in hand, mind brimming with the weight of scientific endorsements that once elevated humble warm milk to the status of medicine. The memory of that creamy sip lingers on your tongue, a gentle reminder that even the most clinical approbations sometimes circle back to cozy kitchen rituals. You find yourself guided into a shadowy parlor hung with velvet drapes and shelves of curious busts, where a tall phrenologist in a frock coat beckons you to sit on a stiff wooden chair. You probably won't survive learning that Victorians believed bumps on your skull could predict how well you'd sleep but tonight. You're about to discover exactly how they linked cranial contours to nightly rest. You settle your elbows on a polished mahogany table and watch as the phrenologist, calapas in hand, scans your skull like a cartographer mapping uncharted territory. Mainstream fact: by the 1840s, phrenology boomed across England and America, with hundreds of lecture halls and societies devoted to measuring cranial organs said to control character traits and bodily functions including sleep patterns. The phrenologist swivels your head gently, his fingertips brushing over a raised bump above your temple. He declares this area the somnus organ, supposedly responsible for regulating the cycle between wakefulness and slumber. You raise an eyebrow. Did this bump grow because you binge-watched late-night dramas, or is it a congenital curse? Fringe tidbit: some enthusiasts went so far as to heat small metal probes over a flame and press them against specific skull points, convinced that localized warmth would stimulate the sleep center, though many clients ended up with nothing more than a mild headache and an amusing anecdote for the drawing room. Historians still argue whether these heated probe sessions ever extended beyond a handful of zealous practitioners, or remained the stuff of scandalous rumor. The phrenologist jots notes in a spiral-bound ledger, sketching the outline of your head with exaggerated markings. He explains that a pronounced ridge at the back signifies restive reflection, where overthinking at bedtime leads to restless tossing. You imagine a scholar perched atop that ridge, scribbling midnight essays on insomnia while you lie wide awake. A light joke floats through your mind: if only they'd had sleep apps. A little digital nudge might have saved you from decades of cranial traumas. He measures your imaginative region above the ear next. An active imagination here, he suggests. Tapping his caliper means vivid dreams that wake you. He pauses to let that sink in. You grinure. Last few nights of bizarre dreams featuring dancing cucumbers and polite raccoons suddenly make sense. Mainstream fact: phrenologists publish detailed manuals mapping nearly 30 different organs on the skull, each purportedly linked to behaviors, emotions, or physiological processes like appetite and acetylcholine production. As you lean forward to speak, he points to a flattened area above your brow. "Ah, underdeveloped dream organ," he pronounces gravely. "That explains your difficulty drifting off." Fringe detail: one eccentric phrenologist reportedly proposed soaking feather quills in milk and tracing them over the forehead to wake. The dream organ, though, most clients describe the sensation as ticklish at best and tickle at worst. Scholars still debate whether any followers truly adopted this quill tracing method, or if it belonged to the realm of phrenological folklore. You flex your jaw and chuckle at the notion of quilticles curing insomnia. But the phrenologist remains earnest. He produces a small ceramic phrenology head, its surface segmented into colorful wedges, and invites you to compare your caliper readings. You notice some wedges are labeled tenderness, omitiveness, and acquisitiveness traits, far removed from sleep but somehow all implicated in the path to a peaceful night. A modern aside crosses your thoughts. This feels like uploading your personality to an encrypted server that also critiques your pillow quality. Behind him, shelves of phrenological periodicals boast titles like the Monthly Skull Examiner and the American Journal of Cerebral Physiology. You pick up a yellowed pamphlet titled Cranial Curiosities in Sleep, which claims that steam-infused head wraps could realign cranial organs overnight. A light joke flutters: if they could patent pillow-based steam wraps today, they'd outsell every weighted blanket on Amazon. Yet here, in the candlelit gloom, the idea seems almost plausible. He instructs you to clasp a small pillow studded with glass beads under your head at a 45-degree angle, claiming this posture would encourage airflow to the somnus organ. You comply, gingerly shifting yourself as though experimenting on a particularly delicate contraption. Mainstream fact: 19th century manuals often included elaborate illustrations of sleeping postures, head supports, and bedroom layouts, all designed to optimize the so-called phrenological index for rest. Your neck protests the angle after a moment, and you wrinkle your nose at the thought of nightly bead-studded pillow routines. Yet the phrenologist nods approvingly as though you're on the verge of transcending mortal insomnia. Fringe tidbit: a small number of devotees wore custom-carved ivory bands around the skulls to gently redistribute pressure among phrenological organs. Though most dismissed these bands as fashionably moronic kazoo-like headgear, historians still debate whether any surviving specimens of ivory headbands exist in museum collections or were melted down for trivial reasons. You sink back slowly, imagining sunlight streaming through a bedroom window as French doors open to a garden at dawn. Phrenology's promised land of perfect sleep. A light joke emerges. Perhaps the French would have called it La Somnus Shift, complete with croissants and chamomile in their morning paper. The phrenologist leans in to record your final readings and issues a solemn decree. You must apply a gentle scalp massage nightly, focusing strokes above the somnus bump to prime the organ for rest. You crack a wry smile as he hands you a gold leaf prescription card embossed with his name and a note: stimulate bump nocti uci dormir. You tuck it into your coat pocket like a curious talisman as you rise. The phrenologist offers one last caution: avoid reading by bright gaslight before bed, as it contracts the dream organ and undermines your prospects for slumber. Mainstream fact: early sleep hygiene advice from phrenologists intersected with broader Victorian concerns about over-illumination and eye strain, foreshadowing modern screen time warnings. You step back into the hallway, the memory of calibers pinching your skull still tingling. You might wonder whether those carefully measured bumps held any real sway over your nights, or simply offered a comforting explanation for your tossing and turning. Historians still argue whether phrenology's focus on skull mapping spurred genuine interest in brain function or merely distracted from more rigorous neurologic research. You pat your head, half expecting to find the somnus bump conspicuously raised, but feel only smooth bone beneath your fingers. A final wink of humor drifts. If phrenologists could email updates today, they'd probably send you weekly bump adjustment newsletters. Yet as you wander downstairs, you carry the echo of that curious session, proof that, in the Victorians' quest for restful nights, even skull bumps could become keys to the bedroom door. You step from the grand drawing room into a servant's quarters and immediately sense you've crossed an invisible boundary. On one side, polished mahogany and copper milk boilers gleam under chandelier light. On the other, a soot-smudged kettle perches on a tiny hearth, steam rising in a humble curl. You probably won't survive the stark contrast between the milk rituals of Victorian elites and the nightly brews of working-class families, but tonight, you'll traverse both worlds, sensing through every sip how class-shaped the art of the NIGHTCAP. In a manor house kitchen, the dairy mistress commands an array of specialized vessels: a silver-lined milk warmer, a porcelain jug reserved for evening servings, and a copper-clad double boiler inscribed with a family crest. Mainstream fact: by the 1880s, upper-class households routinely invested in bespoke milk boilers, costing upwards of 5 Guinness, an enormous sum, equivalent 2 weeks of a laborer's wages, to ensure uniform heating and elegant presentation. You watch a footman ladle warm milk with ceremonial precision into bone china cups, the liquid shimmering like moonlight on a pond. A light joke drifts through your mind: if only modern baristas claimed to heat milk to Guardian-approved protocols, coffee shops might sell golden tickets instead of macchiatos. Meanwhile, down the back staircase in a row house flat, you find the cook balancing a battered enamel pan on a single iron ring. Here, the evening dairy is as much about practicality as it is about comfort. Working-class families often received slightly soured milk from the morning delivery, then skimmed off any cream for butter and used the remaining liquid for nighttime cups. Fringe tidbit: some families flavored this skimmed milk with a spoonful of molasses or treacle left over from baking, both to mask its tang and to stretch sugar rations, though neighbors whispered that a spoonful of blackstrap could substitute for a clandestine shot of whiskey. Historians still argue whether these sweeteners truly enhanced sleep or merely distracted from a lean diet of potatoes and broth. You lift your cup in each setting almost simultaneously. In the manor, the cup is heavy with gilded trim, cool enough to touch. In the flat, the enamel cup warms your fingers with home-forged familiarity. You sip in the manor house and taste delicate notes of imported cinnamon and nutmeg spices, so prized you'd pay a week's coal ration for a small jar in the flat. You sip and detect the robust tang of molasses, a flavor bold enough to remind you that evenings often ended with half-burnt candles and whispered prayers for the next day's wages. A light joke surfaces: if both cups had Instagram accounts, one would post #LavenderLuxury and the other #TREACLE Tuesdays. In elite circles, the nightcap ritual extended beyond ingredients. Gentlemen and ladies gathered in smoking rooms or boudoir parlors, where a butler served warm milk alongside soft harp or pianoforte strains, inviting polite conversation until eyelids drooped. Mainstream fact: social diaries from London's high society around 1890 record charitable evenings where milk nightcaps were offered to convalescing guests after operas or elaborate dinners. As though milk were the ultimate restorative elixir, you imagine yourself reclining on a chaise longue, a lace-fringed handkerchief at your throat, drinking in both milk and genteel gossip an immortal scene of poise and propriety. Back in the working-class flat, the ritual is quieter yet no less meaningful. After the children scrub off soot from a long day's work, the mother heats the milk over a charcoal brazier, stirring in a pinch of ground oatmeal to thicken the broth, or mum's porridge, as her youngest calls it. Fringe detail: in some industrial towns, families swore by adding a shard of hailstone like salt they called windstone, collected from chimney tops during winter storms, believing the mineral trace soothed coughs and checked night sweats. Historians still debate whether whinstone was actual meteorological byproduct or clever marketing by backyard tinkerers. You picture two clocks ticking in tandem in the manner a stately grandfather clock swells the room with every chime, marking the hour precise enough to ensure the dairy's temperature stays within a 3-degree margin. In the flat, a battered pocket watch flips open with a reluctant click, its hands often lagging behind true time but trusted nonetheless to call the family to bed. A modern aside nudges at your awareness. In both worlds, routine was king, farmers setting milking times by church bells and servants adjusting milk coolers by pocket watches. Long before medical journals defined circadian rhythms, elite households sometimes reserved a nightcap footman whose sole duty was to deliver warmed milk and wish each guest sleep sweetly. Mainstream fact. By 1895, some large estates employed specific staff, often recently retired soldiers, to oversee evening refreshments, a luxury that cost hundreds of pounds annually in wages. You imagine the footman's starched uniform and quiet bow, a gesture as refined as the milk's aroma. A light joke occurs. If today's hotels offered nightcap staff in tuxedos, travel vlogs might rank them alongside continental breakfasts. In contrast, the working-class nightcap was communal. A single pot passed from hand to hand around a kitchen table lit by tallow dips, each family member stealing a sip before passing it on. No one complained when the cup returned 3/4 empty. It was a sign of solidarity, the shared warmth, a final comfort before night's chill. Fringe tidbit. Some industrious tenants boiled mattress straw under the pot to impart a faint hay scent, a sensory callback to summer fields they rarely saw, believing it improved dreams. Historians still argue whether such aromatic experiments influenced collective sleep or simply provided anecdotal amusement in soot-laden homes. You move between these two scenes in your mind's eye, savoring how each sip evokes distinct textures. The manna's velvety mouthfeel beneath a swirl of ivory-white foam, and the flat's grainy thickness tinged with molasses grit. Both are nightcaps, yet each tells a story of resources, priorities, and the lengths people went to reclaim rest. A light joke drifts. Perhaps if Victorian milk marketers had truly understood this divide, they'd have printed for high society and for hard workers on their labels, complete with dancing cows in top hats or suit-caked overalls. Whether rich or poor, everyone shared one conviction. Warmed milk signaled closure of the day's toil, a pause before sleep. Mainstream fact in both settings. Nightly milk rituals persisted well into the 20th century, until electric kettles and amphetamine-fueled night shifts began to append routines. You lean back and reflect on how a simple beverage bridged class lines even as it highlighted social divides. Historians still argue whether the milk nightcap was truly egalitarian or another veneer of refinement, glossing over deeper inequities in Victorian society. As you drift away from these kitchens, you carry the resonance of each ritual, the manna's hush of silk and silver, the flat's murmur of family voices and crackling hearth. In both worlds, the same humble milk became alchemy, a bomb that crossed boundaries of wealth and status, whispered promises of calm, and united exhausted bodies in search of sleep. Perhaps that is its sweetest legacy, one cup at a time, reminding you that sometimes the most profound comforts arise from the simplest of ingredients. You wander into a low-ceilinged spice room tucked behind the manna's pantry, where hushed lantern light flickers over rows of glass jars brimming with cinnamon sticks, nutmeg kernels, and exotic powders from distant lands. You probably won't survive discovering how Victorians turned their bedtime milk into an aromatic colonial cocktail, but here you are, inhaling the heady perfume of warm spices that once traveled half the globe to settle in your sleepy nightcap. As you brush a finger against a jar of Ceylon cinnamon, its scent unfurls like an exotic lullaby, promising both comfort and a whisper of far-off markets. Mainstream fact: by the 1870s, Britain's colonial spice trade funneled vast quantities of cinnamon from Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, and nutmeg from the Banda Islands into London ports, driving down prices enough that even middle-class households could afford to season their evening drinks. You lift a slender stick of cassia, noting its deep russet hue, and imagine the ship convoys threading through monsoon swells to deliver these treasures, an odyssey of salt and wind that culminates in your cup. You select a few broken quills of cinnamon, break them into small pieces, and drop them into a pot of milk warming over a low flame. Fringe tidbit: a handful of enterprising apothecaries once recommended infusing milk with powdered green cardamom from India, claiming its cool, aromatic profile balanced the cinnamon's warmth, though most Victorians balked at paying extra for pods that looked like they belonged in a dentist's toolkit. Historians still argue whether these cardamom-infused blends ever achieved popular adoption or remained the fringe experiments of adventurous spice merchants. As the milk simmers, stir gently with a wooden spoon carved from the same oak as your barley water ladle. Tiny bubbles form around the cinnamon fragments, releasing trails of aromatic steam that curl around your face like a velvet scarf. A light joke drifts through your mind. If only modern diffusers could capture this exact blend, we'd pay triple. For a colonial spice dose sent on Etsy, the warmth spreads through the room, and you breathe deeply, letting hints of clove and pepper root you in that comforting glow. You sprinkle a pinch of freshly grated nutmeg into the pot, watching the fine dust swirl in a golden haze. Mainstream fact: nutmeg was prized not only for its flavor but also for its purported medicinal properties. Victorian health writers credited it with calming digestive spasms and easing nervous tension, making it a perfect partner for warm milks. A sedative reputation. A cheeky aside: nothing says sleep potion like seasoning your drink with something also used in mysterious cough lozenges. You imagine gasping at the spice's heady kick, a playful wake-up call before surrendering to slumber. The spice-infused milk offers a sensory richness far beyond plain cream. Fringe detail: a rumor circulated that one savvy spice merchant mixed trace amounts of pimento berry oil and essence from another Caribbean export into late-night batches, claiming it induced dreamscapes vivid as cinema. Though critics dismissed it as hallucinogenic housewife hearsay, historians still debate whether these pimento experiments existed or were simply tales spun by boozy merchants aiming to boost sales. You ladle the fragrant mixture into a fine china cup, its rim warmed by steam and dusted with a wisp of powdered ginger. A playful aside: in modern foodie circles, this might be called a golden milk spice latte, complete with sparkly specks and a cheeky pun about spice up your sleep. But here, in the formality of Victorian candlelight, it carries a solemn promise of rest, bridging continents in every sip. As you cradle the cup in both hands, you sense the weight of empires in its flavor, the lingering warmth of tropical plantations, the sweat of sailors hauling cargo, the hush of dusty bazaars. Each swallow feels like a journey, your palate tracing caravan routes from Batavia to Bristol. Mainstream fact: Victorian cookbooks from the 1880s recommended steeping cinnamon sticks in milk for at least 5 minutes to extract full flavor and medicinal compounds, a practice derived from earlier Moorish and Indian culinary traditions. Introduced via trade routes, you settle into a velvet-upholstered armchair, the cup's warmth radiating through your palms. Fringe tidbit: certain spiritualists allege that sprinkling powdered cinnamon on the hearth before brewing sent aromatic prayers to the ancestors, aiding prophetic dreams, though many dismissed this as esoteric kitchen witchery. Historians still argue whether these spiritual flavorings influenced mainstream domestic rituals or remained confined to secret circles at country fairs. A plume of steam drifts upward as you sip. The milk's creamy texture melds with the cinnamon's tickle and the nutmeg's warm tingle, creating a symphony of flavors that slides down your throat like liquid sunset. A light joke teases your tongue: if you sneezed mid-sip you'd launch a spice storm on the carpets below, a cleanup you'd likely regret in the morning. Yet any mess seems worth a sensory voyage this cup provides. You glance across the room at a tray of leftover barley water and honey spoons, recalling how each remedy you've encountered layered upon the last. Now colonial spices add a final dimension, a global flourish atop local tradition. Mainstream fact: many Victorian households blended multiple sleep aids in one cup, mixing honey, barley residue and a dash of cinnamon, trusting that synergy would maximize calm. You imagine a modern wellness influencer live streaming this blend, complete with candlelit ASMR and whispered product plug-ins. Outside, a distant clock tower tolls the hour, its deep notes resonating like a lullaby across the estate grounds. You hold the cup to your lips again, letting the spice steam kiss your face. Fringe detail: eccentric recipe scribes sometimes recommended pairing the spice-infused milk with a slice of seed cake or a spoonful of rosehip jam, arguing the complementary sweetness would carry you into dreams, though most diners found the combination too cloying for nocturnal digestion. Scholars still debate whether these cake accompaniments ever transcended recipe books and entered the dining room. A modern aside flickers through your mind: if you had to Instagram this moment, you'd caption it "spice and slumber," complete with hashtags like #VictorianVibes and #SleepLikeAroyal. But here, no likes nor comments interrupt the glow, only the hush of pages in your notebook as you scribble down the blend's ratios for future midnight experiments. You finish the last sip, feeling warmth pooling in your chest. The spice's aromatic oils linger on your tongue, urging a slow exhale that eases tension from your shoulders. A final light joke surfaces: if cinnamon and nutmeg could chat, they'd probably gossip about how they once ruled empires before ending up in your tea set. Historians still argue whether this experimental spice mixture truly delivered the best sleep or simply offered the richest storytelling in a cup. As the kettle cools and the spice jars fall silent, you set the empty cup aside. The aroma clings to the tablecloth like a farewell embrace. You stand, take a deep breath, and allow the layered warmth colonial spice, honey sweetness, barley memory to settle into your bones. Tonight you have tasted both empire and comfort in one cup, a bittersweet reminder that sleep often arrives on the wings of distant winds. You step into a softly lit nursery where moonlight filters through gauzy curtains, casting silver patterns on the worn oak floorboards. A cradle gently rocks in the corner. It's rattled like a distant lullaby. You probably won't survive seeing how meticulously Victorian parents prepared bedtime brews for their little ones, but tonight, you'll learn how these tender rituals soothed restless tots across the empire. You approach a stout mahogany changing table where a porcelain bowl sits atop a linen cloth embroidered with tiny blue roses. Inside, a nursemaid stirs a creamy concoction of warm milk mixed with finely crushed barley and a whisper of treacle. Mainstream fact: mid-Victorian childcare manuals often recommended barley-laced milk for infants over 6 months, asserting that the grain's soluble fibers eased digestion while the milk provided necessary protein for growing bodies. The nursemaid holds the bowl at chest height, inhaling the comforting aroma before tasting a drop to ensure it's neither too hot nor too bland. The baby, swaddled snugly in a cotton wrap, fusses at the edge of wakefulness, blinking sleepy eyes, as the nursemaid draws the porcelain spoon toward its tiny mouth. Fringe detail: some upper-class households added a few threads of saffron to the bedtime brewing, exotic luxury believed to induce royal slumber, though critics warn it was as costly as it was unnecessary. Historians still argue whether saffron's pigment actually influenced sleep patterns or simply served as a status symbol in nurseries. You lean closer and see the nursemaid use a small silver thermometer, ensuring the milk's temperature registers around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, the ideal lukewarm zone that wouldn't scald tender gums. Mainstream fact: pediatric texts of the 1880s began to detail precise feeding temperatures, marking a shift from vague warm descriptors to reproducible guidelines, an early reflection of Victorian scientific rigor applied to childcare. You suppress a grin imagining a modern baby monitor alert: warning, milk off by 2 degrees. The infant's lips part, and it sucks the spoon with an earnest determination that reminds you of a tiny steam engine fueling itself for a long night's journey. A light joke drifts through your mind: if only toddlers today had such dignified dining equipment instead of sippy cups that magically leak everywhere. Within moments, the swaddle loosens, and the baby's eyelids flutter shut as the creamy brew works its magic. Across the room, a line of antique dolls' porcelain heads and cloth bodice stands sentinel on a bookshelf, their painted eyes forever fixed on this nightly performance. You'd think they'd grown bored of the spectacle, but perhaps they're merely unborn witnesses to centuries of shared parenthood anxiety. Fringe tidbit: some eccentric governesses recommended lining the doll's eyes with tiny silver studs to reflect moonlight better, believing the glitter would distract colicky infants, but most parents found shiny doll eyes more likely to startle than soothe. Scholars still debate whether reflective toys ever eased teething troubles or simply added to nursery clutter. You notice a small basin at the nursemaid's feet filled with scalding water and strips of soft cloth. After each spoonful, she dips the cloth and wipes the baby's chin, preventing sticky drips from matting down fine curls. The ritual is as much about cleanliness as comfort, reinforcing maternal lessons passed down through generations. Mainstream fact: household manuals of the era frequently emphasized hygiene, warning that neglected dribbles of milk could attract weevils or breed skin rashes. You chuckle at the thought of early insect deterrents in the nursery, long before spray cans dared disturb a child's dreams. As the baby settles, the nursemaid replaces the spoon with a small piece of soft bread crust dipped in cooled milk, finger snack meant to encourage self-soothing and teach the art of gentle munching. Fringe detail: a rare handful of pediatric guides advocated for dipping stray strands of soft candlewick into the milk, claiming the wick's mild absorbency mimicked a pacifier's comfort, though most families wisely avoided risking a spark in the crib. Historians still argue whether wick snuggling ever enjoyed widespread trial or belonged solely to the scrapbooks of experimental midwives. You tiptoe to a corner where a tall walnut wardrobe hides a collection of nightcaps embroidered with initials. The nursemaid gently slips a lace-trimmed cap over the baby's head, tying the ribbons under a soft chin. Mainstream fact: nightcaps, originally popular in medieval Europe, remained common in Victorian nurseries, believed to preserve body heat during cold nights before central heating became standard. A playful aside: today's toddlers might trade such caps for character-themed beanies, but the cozy, draft-blocking intent remains unchanged. Beside the cradle, a small wicker basket holds a vial of orange flower water. The nursemaid dabs a drop on the infant's palms and behind the ears, a perfumed practice thought to calm nerves. Fringe tidbit: a rare treat for affluent families involved adding lavender oil to the spritz, though some perfumers secretly warned that too much essential oil could cause restless dreams. Scholars still debate whether these aromatic baths truly improved sleep or merely scented the nursery to mask less pleasant odors. You hear a soft whisper as the nursery door opens. It's the child's mother, gloved hands clasped before her. She steps forward and dips her finger into the remaining barley milk mixture, tasting it to reassure herself of its sweetness and warmth. Mainstream fact: maternal involvement in spontasting persisted despite professional nursemaids reflecting a deeply held belief in the mother's role as the ultimate quality controller of her child's nourishment. You can't help but admire this fusion of science and maternal instinct. The mother croons a lilting lullaby, her voice low and measured, a tender counterpoint to the nursery's wooden rattle. You imagine parents in working-class flats humming similar tunes but accompanied by the hiss of a coal fire and the click of a crusty kettle. A light joke surfaces. Perhaps modern parents would endorse a milk nightcap karaoke segment on their baby monitors if it guaranteed universal cuteness. As the lullaby ends, the mother leans in to whisper one last line in the baby's ear. Rest, my love. Let milk's magic mend your dreams. Then she reaches down, lifting the swaddled bundle and carefully tucking it into the cradle with a plush hand. The mobile overhead tiny wooden birds painted in pastel hues gently rocks, its soft creak harmonizing with the lullaby's echo. You step back, heart warmed by the scene's intimacy. The nursemaid dims the lamp to its lowest glow, and you notice how the shadows stretch, elongating until the nursery feels bigger yet more cocooned at once. Fringe detail. A handful of Victorian designers crafted nightlight globes made of opal glass, rumored to emit mother's breath warmth, when light though few homes could afford such luxuries. Historians still argue whether these specialized nightlights ever caught on or sank into obscurity due to cost. The mother presses a final kiss to the baby's forehead, and a hush settles over the room. You watch as the cradle's soft sway slows, then stops, signaling true sleep has arrived. Mainstream fact. Victorian pediatric conferences began to caution against overswaying, warning that too vigorous rocking might overstimulate an infant's vestibular system. Though this advice often clashed with parents' instincts for comforting motion, you smile at how even the gentlest customs inspired debates within the emerging field of child health. You tiptoe out of the nursery, carrying with you the memory of barley-kissed milk, tender spoonfuls, and the hush of lullabies. Tonight, you've glimpsed how warm milk united science, tradition, and maternal love in every child's bedside brew. As you close the door on the sleeping infant, you sense that this simple sip marks not only the close of a day but the start of dreams woven from care, curiosity, and the timeless promise of rest. You slip away from the whispering nursery and find yourself on a damp cobblestone street where lantern light glints off puddles and the low murmur of pub chatter seeps through stout oak doors. You probably won't survive discovering how Victorian working men and women chose frothy ale over warm milk for late-night comfort, but here you are, about to step into a smoky taproom where the clink of tankards competes with the hush of genteel drawing rooms. Pushing open the heavy door, you're met by a wave of malt and hop aromas, mingled with tobacco and steamed leather. Mainstream fact. By the 1870s, London boasted over 40,000 public houses, each serving locally brewed ales, whose alcohol content ranged from mild small beer under 1% ABV to hearty porters exceeding 5% ABV. You follow a narrow aisle past scarred wooden benches to a corner where a cluster of regulars lean into their flagons, shoulders slumped in familiar repose. As you slide onto a worn stool, the landlord sets down a pewter jug filled with foamy porter. A light joke teases your lips. If modern bartenders wrote ASMR blog posts, they'd whisper, "Listen to the gentle hiss of ale pouring," as you drift off. You lift the jug and inhale the roast barley scent, feeling the promise of warmth and merriment. Fringe tidbit. Certain London brewers once added crushed seaweed during mashing, believing the ocean minerals boosted head retention and imparted an earthy umami note, though traditionalists sneered at the notion of kelp-infused grog. Historians still debate whether seaweed ever truly enhanced ale, or simply added a whimsical marketing twist. You take a slow sip, letting the liquid's caramel sweetness and bitter edge swirl across your palate. Around you, patrons exchange hushed gossip, tales of workplace mishaps, family feuds, and the latest penny dreadful scandal. The pub's low ceiling vibrates with laughter as a regular recounts how he once tried warm milk nightcaps, only to wake up feeling like a chilled custard rather than a rested man. A tongue-in-cheek aside crosses your mind. For some Victorious, the only thing sleeping better than you was a properly fermented stout. Behind the bar, the landlady polishes glasses with a frayed towel, her movements rhythmic as a metronome. Mainstream fact. Female publicans were common in working-class neighborhoods, and by 1880 over 20% of London's pubs were run by women, many inheriting establishments from late husbands. You imagine her mother's advice echoing in her ear. Keep the taps flowing, and the house will always be warm. The frothy head on your ale clings stubbornly to the jug's rim, proof that skillful conditioning and clean yeast cultures made all the difference. You shift slightly, feeling the weight of your lantern-lit stool beneath you. Fringe detail. A handful of experimental publicans in East London reputedly served milk stouts brews, made by substituting part of the mash bill with lactose sugar in hopes of bridging the gap between dairy nightcaps and ale lovers' cravings. Few survived past trial batches, as lactose-fermented ales tended to sour quickly in unregulated cellars. Scholars still argue whether these midnight milky brews ever garnered a cult following or vanished under the weight of rancid spoilage. Regular at the end of the bar lifts his tankard in greeting, offering you a nod and a wink. He swears by his nightly ale, 2 pints, and I'm off to dreamland faster than any laced milk. You sip again, the cool liquid trailing down your throat. A welcome contrast to the slow creeping warmth of milk in a silver cradle. You consider the physiological tug-of-war, alcohol's depressant effect versus milk's tryptophan boost. Historians still argue whether moderate ale consumption truly promoted sleep or merely dulled senses enough to induce unconsciousness. A small chalkboard behind the bar advertises ale and peas pudding night for a penny extra. You chuckle at the combination's hearty promise: flatbread, spiced peas, and foaming ale all in one go, but you can't imagine sipping milk alongside that plate. Mainstream fact: peas pudding, made from boiled split peas and lard, was a common working-class staple, often served with ale as an evening coma ration to stave off hunger and cold. A light joke drifts: imagine today's late-night influencers live-streaming peas pudding and pint mukbang. It'd blow up on social media for shock value alone. You lean in to hear two clerks debating health advice printed in the evening papers. One insists that warm milk trumps porter for nervous headaches, while the other grumbles that any nightcap lacking a pub sing-song makes for a lonely bed. Fringe tidbit: traveling medicine shows sometimes arrived in the back alleys, hawking patent cures that promise beer-free rest, powdered barley tablets you dissolved in milk, ironically mimicking both pub and parlor traditions. Historians still debate how many Victorians shelled out pennies for these powders instead of spending them on another round. You take a final swallow of your ale, feeling the comforting buzz spread through your limbs. The pub's gas lamps flicker as a sheepdog curls at the hearth. It snores thrum-like beside the crackle of low embers. You notice a cluster of faded posters proclaiming temperance tea at St. Matthew's Hall, alternatives for those wishing to abstain from ale entirely. Mainstream fact: the temperance movement peaked in the late 19th century, advocating for non-alcoholic beverages like coffee, tea, and milk-based tonics, though its moral zeal often clashed with pub culture's camaraderie. A young barmaid glides past, balancing a tray of half-pint glasses topped with raw milk froth and experimental pub milk, introduced by a philanthropic landowner aiming to offer a middle ground. The regulars treat it like a novelty, clinking glasses in mock tribute before returning to real ale with relief. A cheeky aside: if only today's bars offered gastro milk flights alongside microbrews, they'd corner the market on hipster sleep food. PAIRINGS. As you rise to leave, the landlord refills your jug without a word, a silent nod to the ritual's continuity. You step back into the damp night air, the pub's warmth receding behind you like a comfortable dream. The hush of the street feels colder now, and you reflect on how beverages, milk and ale offer divergent paths to the same destination. Oblivion. A final thought lingers. Perhaps the real sleep remedy was the sense of belonging. Whether in a grand drawing room or a noisy taproom, you tuck your coat tighter and let the echo of clinking tankards and whispered gossip fade behind. In the end, both milk and ale served as nightly companions, comforting rituals that soothed exhaustion and ushered weary bodies toward rest. Historians still argue whether the pub's communal buzz or the parlor's quiet cradle held the key to Victorian slumber. Either way, you've sampled both, and now your own eyelids feel notably heavier. You tread across a pebbled courtyard toward a quiet walled garden, where a pale moon illuminates the long ears and gentle eyes of a small herd of donkeys dozing beside a lavender hedge. You probably won't survive uncovering the Victorian fascination with donkey's milk as the ultimate sleep elixir, but tonight, you'll sit among these soft-footed animals and learn why their milk became the stuff of whispered legend. Mainstream. In fact, donkey's milk had enjoyed a storied history in Europe long before the Victorians, praised by ancient physicians like Galen for its digestibility and touted by Roman nobles. Emperor Titus reportedly bathed in it to preserve youthful skin. By the mid-19th century, a handful of British apothecaries stocked tins labeled Lait d'Ane, imported from France, marketing its supposed health benefits to wealthy clientele seeking alternative remedies. You feel the cool night air stir, the lavender carrying a faint floral note that mingles with the breeze from the stables beyond. A mare-striped donkey named Celestine raises her head as you approach the milking bench. Fringe tidbit: some farmers claim that donkeys fed on night-blooming jasmine produced milk with subtle sedative compounds, an idea so fanciful that neighboring estate managers swore they could smell moonlight in Celestine's pail. You extend a gloved hand to pat her muzzle, noting how her soft coat shimmers silver blue under the moon. Historians still argue whether such botanical-infused feed practices ever produced measurable chemical differences or remain the playful inventions of horticultural eccentric. ISTS.U. Settle onto a low wooden stool beside a maid who cradles a porcelain pail beneath Celestine's flank. As she begins to milk, the thin pale liquid streams like quicksilver into the bowl. A light joke flickers: if only modern sleep pod makers could distill donkey's milk into aerosol mist. Pillow Pump Pro might dominate bedtime gadgetry. You inhale the faint aroma, cleaner and sweeter than cow's milk. With a hint of hay and almond, the maid ladles the fresh milk into a small copper kettle set over a gentle flame. Mainstream fact: Victorian apothecaries recommended heating donkey's milk to just below boiling, around 95 degrees Fahrenheit 35 degrees Celsius, to to preserve fragile proteins, then serving it plain or lightly sweetened. In contrast, cow's milk was often scalded to prevent spoilage, a harsher treatment that some believe dulled its subtle benefits. You watch the milk swirl in the copper, the heat coaxing tiny wisps of steam to rise in lazy spirals. As the kettle warms, you notice a faded sign propped against the stable wall, advertising donkey's milk for restful nights from the manor of Lady Abernathy. Fringe detail: Lady Abernathy supposedly offered private subscriptions, sending tins of her estate's donkey's milk to urban customers, charging a guinea per month, an exorbitant sum that placed her tonic squarely in the realm of exclusive luxury. Critics grumbled that the cost outweighed any genuine benefits, yet inquiries flooded her apothecary outlet in Bloomsbury. Scholars still debate whether Lady Abernathy's enterprise genuinely influenced later dairies or was simply an anecdote perpetuated by society gossip columns. You lift the kettle from the flame and pour the warm milk into 2 silver-rimmed cups perched on a nearby stone ledge. The liquid's pale translucence hints at its thin consistency, more akin to water than the creamy fullness of bovine dairy. A tongue-in-cheek aside emerges: it's the only time you'll sip something that feels like a skincare treatment in a teacup. You inhale again, tasting the milk's delicate sweetness earthy enough to evoke sun-warmed straw. You take a slow sip, feeling the liquid glide across your tongue, its texture eerily light, almost lunar in its softness. Early medical writers praised donkey's milk for containing higher levels of lactose and essential amino acids than cow's milk, theoretically promoting better tryptophan absorption and calmer nerves. Yet such claims lacked systematic study, relying instead on artisan pamphlets and apothecary lore rather than clinical trials. Historians still argue whether donkey's milk's nutrient profile truly conferred unique advantages or if its reputation rested on the placebo power of rarity. The maid offers you a small dish of honey caraway seeds to accompany the cup, suggesting the aromatic seeds complement the milk's gentle flavor. You pop a few seeds into your mouth, noting the licorice-tinged warmth that follows. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Certain herbalists insisted that feeding donkeys crushed caraway improved the milk's sedative potency, believing the seed's essential oils passed through animal metabolism into the dairy stream. Yet most modern researchers dismiss such notions as fanciful, arguing that digestive breakdown would neutralize any active compounds before milk secretion. You glance at Celestine, whose ears twitch as if she understands the acclaim attributed to her milk, and you let your gaze drift across the walled garden's moonlit paths. A gentle joke crosses your mind. Imagine a luxury spa treatment where you nap in a stable with donkeys serenading you. Nap with nags, as the Victorians might have branded it. Instead, the milk in your cup carries both the weight of expectation and a whisper of pastoral tranquility. That's the honey caraway melts into the milk. Its warmth amplifies the cup's calming sensation. You breathe deeply, feeling tension dissolve from your shoulders. Mainstream fact: periodicals like The Lancet occasionally published letters describing donkey's milk as an acceptable alternative for those intolerant of cow's milk, citing fewer reports of indigestion and colic. Though these observations remained anecdotal rather than systematically analyzed, you wonder how many families, desperate for sleep, placed faith in these fragmented endorsements. The night grows quieter as you finish the second cup, the moon sinking behind cloud banks, and you sense the air cool around you. Fringe detail: rumor held that certain moonlit milking sessions incorporated lullaby singing by the dairyman, whose soothing tenor combined with donkey's milk guaranteed dreams as serene as the night itself. Though charming, no contemporary diaries record the actual practice, leaving scholars to debate whether this melodic myth was widespread or some dairyman's clever advertising gimmick. With the cups drained, the maid returns Celestine to her straw-filled stall and brushes her tail gently, humming a soft tune. You feel the last warmth of the milk linger in your chest, a subtle glow chasing away the chill. Mainstream fact: by the turn of the century, donkey's milk dairies emerged in France's Provence region, and some British aristocrats corresponded with their owners to import fresh pints, testimony to the beverage's enduring allure among the elite. Yet these dairies remained niche, unable to scale for mass consumption. You step away from the stable, leaving Celestine and her companions to their rest, and follow the garden's winding path back toward the manor's lights. As you walk, you feel a quiet curiosity stirring wood. You choose donkey's milk over barley water or honey-spiced cow's milk. Historians still argue whether the donkey's milk craze reflected authentic therapeutic promise or the era's penchant for exotic remedies. Regardless, the memory of that pale liquid, warmed just so, carries you onward toward slumber. A final light joke surfaces. If modern wellness influencers embraced donkey's milk, they'd pair it with matcha and market it as Naxim detox latte. Yet here, under ancient oaks and lavender's watchful scent, the simplicity of warm donkey's milk, served by candlelight, offers a timeless invitation to unwind. As you round the final hedge and glimpse the flicker of lamplight through manor windows, you cradle the lingering warmth in your palms, an unexpected gift from a humble beast, guiding you gently toward the realm of dreams. You slip through a heavy velvet curtain into a smoky lecture hall where gaslight flickers on polished wood, and the hush of anticipation trembles in the air like a held breath. You probably won't survive the dramatic spectacle that mesmerism brought to Victorian sleep cures tonight. You'll witness how mats of warmed milk and swirling magnetized passes promise to hypnotize insomnia away. You settle onto a stiff-backed chair in the front row, keen to see how this theatrical remedy unfolded under candle and spotlight. At the lectern stands a man in a morning coat, his hair swept back like he just rode in from a tempest. He's Dr. Percival Barnaby, self-styled as a somnolence magnetizer, one of many mesmerist practitioners who believed that directing unseen animal magnetism could coax both body and mind into tranquil slumber. Mainstream fact: by the 1850s, mesmerism, originating from Franz Anton Mesmer's late 18th century theories, had spread across Europe and North America, with dozens of London clinics advertising magnetic sleep treatments alongside more conventional cures like warm milk tonics. Barnaby's assistant wheels in a low table bearing a brass basin filled with warm milk, the surface rippling in the lantern glow. Fringe tidbit: some mesmerists insisted that the milk itself absorbed and transmitted magnetic currents, and so it had to be stirred in a precise counterclockwise motion exactly 9 times before the ritual they called the bouquet of sun. You watch the assistant trace the pattern with a silver ladle, imagining that every swirl charged the liquid with hypnotic energy, though modern baristas might call it oversteam. Barnaby gestures for silence, raising a slender rod with a polished crystal tip. He explains that the crystal, charged by his vital force, will focus energy toward the patient's pineal gland, purportedly the organ of sleep and dreams. You recall your phrenologist's caliper measurements above that temple bump, the somnus organ, and wonder if these hypnotic rays target the same bumpy real estate. Historians still argue whether mesmerist ceremonies drew inspiration from phrenological maps or simply co-opted skull jargon for showmanship. He invites a volunteer, a weary schoolteacher named Mrs. Pembroke, forward. She sits in an armchair, draped with a velvet shawl, clutching a warmed cup of milk in trembling hands. Barnaby hovers the crystal rod above her head, murmuring incantations about magnetic harmonies and sleep restoration frequencies. A hush descends so complete you can hear Mrs. Pembroke's heart tapping like a tiny bell. A light joke flits through your mind. If only they'd had binaural beats, they might have piped in whale song tracks instead of crystal proverbs. Then Barnaby lowers the rod toward the milk. He dips the crystal tip into the frothy surface and lifts it slowly, as though coaxing invisible chains out of the liquid. The milk steams in swirling vortices, and Mrs. Pembroke's eyes grow heavy, her lids fluttering like dying moths. Mainstream fact: theatrical mesmerist sessions often incorporated aromatic adjuncts, lavender sprigs, violet sachets, even crushed mint leaves to amplify the sensory environment and deepen the trance. Joining earlier lavender hearth experiments, in a lineage of scented slumber aids, you notice several assistants in white smocks moving among the audience, lightly touching forearms or shoulders, spreading the magnetic current through the gathering. Fringe detail: one rogue practitioner once tried using a magnetized horseshoe instead of a crystal, arguing that equine energy was more potent, a notion so odd even fellow mesmerists balked at its barnyard connotations. Scholars still debate whether such equine accessories ever caught on, or if they belonged solely to the realm of mesmerist. Tall tales. Mrs. Pembroke's cup of milk falls from her fingers and shatters on the floor, its warm contents pooling like spilled dreams. A gasp ripples through the crowd, but Barnaby assures everyone that this is part of the process. The release of old anxieties and the opening of the sleep channel. A tongue-in-cheek aside crosses your thoughts. It's the only time in history when smashing a cup was pitched as a step toward peaceful recovery. Barnaby invites you to take a sip of the remaining milk from a spare cup held by an assistant. You lift the china handle, noting that the milk tastes of gentle cream and faintly of honey, perhaps a recapitulation of earlier sections' sweet rituals. You swallow, feeling the liquid's warmth cascade through your chest, and for a heartbeat, you swear you sense a subtle current under your skin, as if the room's collective expectation flows through each drop. The lights dim further, leaving only a ring of candles around Mrs. Pembroke's chair. Barnaby moves circles of a magnetized rod above her outstretched arms, sweeping arcs of energy that glint off the brass basin behind him. Mainstream fact: Victorian mesmerist manuals described elaborate hand motions, long sweeps, cross patterns, and feather passes designed to buff the patient's aura and soothe neural disturbances. A proto-hypnosis that predated modern hypnotherapy by decades. As the session progresses, you notice that multiple audience members start to yawn and nod off, their heads dipping toward the velvet cushions. Fringe tidbit: rumor held that some less scrupulous mesmerists secretly dosed the milk with diluted laudanum to bolster the effect, betraying the public to a cocktail of mesmerism and morphine. Historians still argue whether these covert opiates additions were widespread or merely sensational accusations by skeptical press. You lean back in your seat, your own eyelids growing heavy in tandem with the audience, the hush of dripping wax lamps, the muffled breathing of slumbering patrons, and the distant drip of milk on marble create an ASMR-like soundscape albeit one punctuated by the occasional brittle crash of porcelain. A light joke whispers, "Forget meditation apps. Victorian mesmerists delivered immersive sleep theatres at 15 pence a ticket. Mrs. Pembroke's head finally rests against the shawl-covered chair. Barnaby announces her initiation into magnetic healing. An assistant drapes a velvet hood over her face, marking her safe passage into rest. You sense a collective exhale, the room's tension draining like water from a bath. Mainstream facts. By the late 1860s, medical establishments began to denounce mesmerism as charlatanry, yet many continued to clandestinely practice it under the guise of electrotherapeutic treatments, another testament to warm milk's enduring allure in varied guises. You rise with the congregation, stepping into the cool night air as the curtain falls on the spectacle. The echo of clinking crystal and warm milk rituals lingers in your senses, like a half-remembered dream. You might wonder if the genuine benefits came from magnetic currents or from that simple cup of warm milk you all shared in uncanny synchrony. Historians still argue whether mesmerist sessions offered any physiological improvement or merely harnessed social suggestion to lull weary minds. Outside, the gas lamps flicker above wet cobbles and the hush of the night feels deeper somehow, as though the artifice of the mesmerist's theater peeled away to reveal the silent promise of sleep. You pat your pocket, half expecting to find a fragment of crystal and a drop of milk for further experiments at home. A final modern aside, if they had Instagram Live, mesmerist sleep shows would have trended under #milkmagnetism and #crystalbedtime, complete with live chat hypnosis. Yet here, in the hush of Victorian nights, the raw blend of ritual, suggestion, and warm milk proved powerful enough to send an entire audience toward the same dream. You turn away from the lecture hall, carrying the echo of Barnaby's gentle, the voice and the curative curves of the crystal. As you stride down the lamplit street, your breath misting in the air, you feel a subtle lightness in your limbs and a calm descent in your mind. The world narrows to the path ahead and the soft promise of rest awaiting you at home. You slip through a side door into a tiled powder room dressed in soft dusk light, where a gleaming copper bathtub waits beside an array of porcelain jugs filled with frothy milk. You probably won't survive discovering how Victorian elites looked in milk baths to soothe both body and mind before bedtime, but tonight, you'll immerse yourself in this opulent ritual and learn why it became a coveted prelude to sleep. The butler gestures for you to step onto a polished oak stool beside the tub. Mainstream fact. By the late 19th century, aristocratic households often maintained dedicated bath servants whose sole duty was to prepare nightly soaks, drawing hot water to precisely 102 degrees Fahrenheit, 39 degrees Celsius, and stirring in measured pails of fresh or powdered milk for maximum skin softening effect. The copper tub, etched with floral motifs, gleams amber in the lantern light, its smooth curves promising a cradle of warmth. You pour 3 large jugs of warmed whole milk into the bath, watching it swirl into the water, turning the liquid pale. Cream fringe tidbit. A few avant-garde bathhouse proprietors in Paris once offered silk fiber milk, adding stray threads of raw silk to the water to create a floating cocoon sensation, though most guests described it as clinging chiffon, and returned to pure milk blends. Historians still argue whether silk fiber baths ever gained popularity beyond fleeting novelty. As the milk blends, you step into the tub, easing your legs into the smooth, creamy water. The sensation is uncanny. Your skin feels as if dipped in velvet, and the air around you carries the faint dairy sweetness of fresh cream. A light joke flits through your mind. If modern spas offered velvet mousse-soak experiences, they'd surely charge triple and include cucumber slices for Instagram aesthetics. Lean back against the tub's sloped end. You notice the attendant has placed a folded linen cloth behind your head and a small bowl of crushed lavender by your elbow. Mainstream fact. Victorian health manuals recommended adding lavender sprigs or essential oil to milk baths to relax muscles and calm the nervous system. Anticipating modern aromatherapy techniques by decades, you inhale the floral note mingling with milk. Feeling tension slip from your shoulders, you run your fingers along the water's surface and find tiny flecks of milk solids drifting like clouds. Fringe detail. Some bathhouse purists scooped to away these solids before stepping in, insisting they left an uneven texture, while others claimed the particles provided gentle exfoliation as you moved. Scholars still debate which camp represented the majority preference among Victorian bathers. The butler softly closes the door, leaving you to the hush of candlelight and the subtle scent of lavender. You sink deeper into the bath, letting milks, natural fats and proteins coat your skin in a nourishing embrace. A tongue-in-cheek aside crosses your thoughts. If only your daily shower came with a protein shake for your skin, you might never shave again. You stretch your arms, watching the lantern flames dance on the water's surface. The milk and lavender blend feels almost ceremonial, as though each swirl carries away a day's worth of worry. Mainstream fact. Milk baths trace their lineage to Cleopatra's reputed nightly soaks, long mythologized in Europe and revived in Victorian spa culture as both cosmetic treatment and relaxation therapy. You smile at joining a tradition so old it spans continents. After 10 minutes, the butler returns with a soft turkey-down towel and a brush made of bristles so fine they resemble a quill's plume. He brushes away the residual milk film from your skin, massaging the towel in slow sweeping motions that leave you both clean and subtly scented. Fringe detail: a handful of beauty-focused journals suggested following the bath with an application of rosewater mixed with glycerin, forming a lightweight lotion said to lock in moisture, though many found the concoction too sticky for evening, where historians still argue whether rosewater glycerin persisted or faded as simpler oils took precedence. Dressed now in a linen robe, you sit by the tub's edge and sip a small flute of chilled milk tinted with a drop of vanilla essence. A light joke drifts. Modern wellness influencers would dub this a boozy bathside milk and livestream your post-soak ritual. Yet here, the quiet clink of the glass and the soft sigh of contentment are reward enough. The butler lowers the lights to a single candle, and you wrap yourself in a plush sheepskin rug laid across a chaise longue nearby. Mainstream fact: weighted rugs and sheepskins underfoot were popular in upper-class bedrooms to maintain warmth and comfort after nighttime baths. Anticipating today's heated floors, you wiggle your toes and sigh, noting how the sensory contrast between warm bath and cool rug heightens relaxation. A gentle breeze drifts through a slightly open window, stirring the curtain and carrying the night's hush inside. You feel a pleasant chill at your neck, reminding you that soon you'll surrender this cozy enclave for a plush four-poster with linen sheets. Fringe detail: a rare few spas advertised moon-blown breeze rooms, where windows were strategically opened to catch nocturnal winds, believing the night air completed the bath's purifying journey. Scholars still debate if any genuine clients flocked to such drafty experiences, or if it was smoke that mirrors marketing. You set aside the empty milk flute and close your eyes, letting the evening's rituals barley blends, honey phrenological passes, and now this decadent bathwash over you in memory. Each practice, though varied in its method, shared a common aim: to coax the body and mind toward repose through warmth, scent, and gentle touch. A final playful thought enters your mind: perhaps the ultimate sleep hack is simply surrendering to a moment of careful ceremony. When you rise to leave, your skin glows with a soft luminescence, and the bathhouse echoes with your quiet footsteps. You thank the butler, rising from sheepskin to polished tile with unexpected reluctance. Mainstream fact: nightly baths fell out of favor with the advent of modern bathrooms and concerns over hot water shortages, shifting the emphasis back to mug-based remedies, but the memory of milk's soothing embrace lingered in beauty lore. You pause at the doorway, inhaling the faint scent of milk and lavender one last time as you step into the corridor. Footsteps echo softly, and the world beyond seems a touch brighter, yet dreamier for having paused so wholly in milk's embrace. You glide toward your bed, body mellowed and mind quieted by the bath's ritual. Perhaps this is Victorian luxury at its most poignant: not the expense, but the intentional sensory-rich pause that makes sleep feel like a hard-earned gift. You step into a tidy kitchen lined with gleaming tins stamped in bold lettering, each promising shelf-stable sweetness: Eagle brand condensed milk and carnation emblazoned in ornate script. You probably won't survive realizing how quickly Victorians, short on refrigeration and long on nostalgia, embraced canned dairy as their latest insomnia cure. But tonight, you're about to trace that sticky sweet craze from factory floors to bedside cups. Mainstream fact: in 1856, American inventor Gail Borden patented a method for condensing milk by evaporating water and sealing it in airtight cans, creating a product that resisted spoilage for months, ideal for urban households and military rations alike. You lift a cylindrical tin, its surface cool under your fingertips, and imagine early adopters prying lids with church key openers, marveling at the thick, sweet cream that slurped out like liquid silk. You pour a spoonful of condensed milk into a small saucepan, the golden mass stretching as it falls, thicker than treacle yet softer than fudge. Fringe tidbit: a handful of enterprising apothecaries once promoted a moonlit milk tonic, blending condensed milk with barley water and a dash of whiskey, an unconventional mashup that promised double the dreams and half the nightmares. Neighbors whispered that the recipe originated with a retired sea captain seeking both warmth and buoyancy on stormy nights. Historians still argue whether this hybrid tonic ever reached mainstream kitchens or remained a sailor's tall tale. You place the pan over a gentle flame and watch as the condensed milk liquefies, forming a glossy elixir that clings to your spoon. A light joke drifts: if modern influencers had discovered this in 19th century parlors, they'd package it as retro goop glow, price it at £10 a jar, and promise detoxing powers overnight. Yet here, households paid pennies for tins that promised long life and short supply worries. As the milk heats, you inhale its caramel-like aroma, richer and more intense than fresh cream. You remember your earlier cups of barley water and honey milk, but this midday miracle of evaporation feels like distilled comfort condensed into one potent dose. Mainstream fact: By the 1870s, British canning factories in Lancashire and Kent churned out over 1 million tins annually, fueled by demand in India, Australia, and Canada, where fresh milk was scarce and sleep sometimes scarcer. You ladle the warm condensed milk into a fine china cup and add hot water to loosen its viscosity, stirring slowly until the liquid pale gold resembles the gentlest dawn. Fringe detail. Some fringe enthusiasts argued that adding a whisker of peppercorn powder to the reconstituted mix boosted circulation and hastened sleep on set, though most drinkers reported nothing more stimulating than a surprise tickle on the tongue. Scholars still debate whether medicinal pepper ever found a true place in condensed milk, tonics, or remained culinary folly. Seated by the hearth, you cradled the cup in both hands, marveling at how condensed milk's shelf stability let distant colonies enjoy a slice of domestic luxury. You imagine settlers on the Patagonian plains or gold miners in Australia stirring warm tins by flickering lanterns, their minds lulled by the same soothing sweetness you sip now. A light joke nudges your thoughts. If survival TV stars today discovered condensed milk's power, they'd pen memoirs titled From Tins to Tranquil Nights. You let the warm liquid slide down your throat. Its sweetness cushions you like a plush quilt, a different experience from plain milk's subtle tryptophan nudge. Mainstream fact. Medical journals of the late 1880s noted that condensed milk's high sugar content could spike blood sugar and then cause a gentle crash, which early physicians speculated might mirror the postprandial somnolence of larger meals. Yet they cautioned moderation lest consumers replace nutritious dinners with syrupy slurp. As steam wafts from your cup, you spy a stack of recipe pamphlets beside the stove, their pages stained with drips of sweet cream. One instructs readers, 2-layer condensed milk at the bottom of a glass and top it with warm skim milk. A tooted nightcap dubbed the Tomes Blend, after a popular women's magazine editor. Fringe tidbit. Rumor claimed that the Tomes Blend was invented to boost magazine subscriptions, offering free tins to new subscribers, a marketing ploy that blurred the line between domestic advice and sponsored content. Historians still argue how much influence periodicals exerted on household beverage trends. You stir twice more, watching the concentric rings collapse into a perfect center. A modern aside surfaces. This is the kind of satisfying swirl ASMR channels would capture in Ultra HD, complete with whispered narration about cream vortex hypnosis. But in the 19th century, no cameras recorded these moments, only the memory of warmth and sweetness lingered. You lift the cup again and gaze into its shimmering surface. The condensed milk seems to glow with its own light, a miniature hearth in your palms. You take a deliberate sip, noting how the richness fills your mouth, then flows into your chest like honeyed gravity. A light joke drifts. If you spilled this golden nectar on the carpet, you'd have a sticky time explaining it to the housekeeper. You lean against the hearth's edge, the kettle's coals casting a soft heat against your back. Mainstream fact. During the siege of Paris in 1870, condensed milk tins fed both civilians and French troops, and its reputation as a comfort food under duress bolstered its association with soothing hardship and restless nights. You imagine besieged families cradling cups of warmed condensed milk in dim cellars, where every sip tasted of both survival and hope. A soft cough behind you signals the cook, who places a small saucer of crushed mint leaves on the table. Sprinkle a few into your cup, watching them swirl like tiny green boats on an amber sea. Fringe detail. Some herbalists insisted that mint's cooling menthol balanced condensed milk's syrupy warmth. Although many Victorian tongues complained, the combo tasted like iced caramel pudding. Scholars still debate whether mint additions ever gained genuine traction or remained novelty. You lean back and close your eyes, letting the sugar crash promise a gentle descent. Each heartbeat feels cushioned, each breath eased, as the condensed milk's buoyant sweetness lifts you closer to drowsiness. Historians still argue whether the extra caloric load mattered more than the ritual's psychology in delivering that sleepy come. After all, a spoonful of ritual often soothes the mind more than the body. When the cup is empty, a pleasant glaze coats your tongue, and you set the tin aside, its lid resting loosely on the edge. You think of the countless tins that shaped Victorian pantries and the stories whispered across wooden tables by candlelight. A final playful thought emerges. If modern snackers discovered this empty tin, they'd lick every last ridge before tossing it for recycling. Yet tonight, you leave it as is a quiet relic of a simpler remedy that you rise to leave. Your limbs feel lighter, your thoughts mellower, and every step toward your bedroom seems guided by the memory of that golden cup. Perhaps the condensed milk craze owes its enduring charm not just to convenience, but to the warmth and sweetness it brought to weary souls across oceans and social divides. With that comforting notion echoing in your mind, you glide into the hush of the hallway, ready for sleep's gentle embrace. You slip into a dimly lit reading room where the crackle of a single burner lamp mingles with the rustle of newsprint, and you spread out an array of Victorian papers, broadsheets, penny weeklies, and glossy satirical magazines, bracing yourself for the razored wit aimed at your nightly milk ritual. You probably won't survive learning how ruthlessly editors and cartoonists mocked the very remedies you've come to cherish. But tonight, You'll trace the laughter that accompanied every steaming cup of warm milk. By the 1860s, Punch magazine had become a household name, its pages awash with cartoons skewering social foibles. Mainstream fact: between 1862 and 1875, Punch ran over 50 cartoons satirizing milk adulteration scandals and genteel nightcap ceremonies, portraying overdressed matrons brandishing milk boilers like dueling pistols and underscoring public anxieties about purity and pretension. You thumb through a well-worn volume and pause at a sketch of a gaunt milkman tiptoeing behind a duke's library couch, pail in hand, while an aristocrat snoozes in a velvet armchair, his monocle dangling like a lost star. You lean closer, inhaling the smoky scent of aged ink, and notice the absurd captions: Sir Reginald's Midnight Blancmange and the Great Milk Purity Expedition. A light joke flits across your mind. If modern influencers parodied home remedies, they'd film TikTok challenges testing how many spoons of starch you could sneak into a latte before a barista cried foul. Fringe tidbit: outside London's press circles, counterfeits of Punch's cartoons were sold as clandestine broadsides in pubs, where Cockney street vendors hawked them alongside penny ales, though few copies survived the damp and the drunks. Appetites for tearing off quips. As you leaf through the Illustrated London News, you spot an editorial cartoon contrasting a cozy family gathered round a milk warmer with a haggard wretch gulping laudanum from a mainstream fact: periodicals like the Illustrated London News regularly use juxtaposition to argue that milk nightcaps were morally and medically superior to opiate tonics, blending gentle ridicule with earnest persuasion. You study the drawings, fine cross-hatching, noting how the artist rendered steam from the milk in billowing curls that echoed the smoke from the opium lamp across the page. A light joke drifts in your thoughts. Imagine today's newspapers mocking smartphone addiction, with caricatures of zombies swiping screens at twilight. Some things never change. Yet here, the satire carried real weight. Families debated whether to trust pill-pushing apothecaries or simply stick to the milk mania everyone was lampooning. Historians still argue whether these satirical treatments actually swayed public behavior or simply entertained already milk-obsessed readers. You move to a stack of penny dreadfuls called The Sleepless Spectator, where anonymous cartoonists drew milk monsters, loose-jointed beasts with milk boilers for heads, terrorizing children in their beds. Fringe detail: rumor held that a covert group of temperance activists commissioned these monstrous sketches to dissuade pub-goers from trading beer for milk ales, though the true origin remains murky. Scholars still debate if the milk monster was ever as feared as the text claims, or if it was an inside joke among a handful of crusading cartoonists. Opening the Evening Standard's gossip column, you find a wry editorial titled "To Sip or Not to Sip," which mocks debutantes who insisted on milk nightcaps at balls, trailing curls of steam as elaborate as their gowns. The writer quips that the milk-emblazoned soiree would have been more memorable if someone had served hot cocoa instead. A light joke surfaces: replace cocoa with oat milk today, and you'd spark a social media firestorm not unlike the Victorian salon squabbles over dairy purity. You notice letters to the editor beneath the editorial, debating whether the wealthy's obsession with milk tonics was a sign of nervous refinement or empty-headed confectionery. One correspondent complains that his neighbor's nightly dairy fumigation fills the street with frivolous fumes, while another defends the practice as harmless and fragrant. Mainstream fact: letter pages in Victorian newspapers provided a forum for diverse voices, from doctors to dairymates debating medical advice's merits and the role of satire in shaping public discourse. A light joke ripples through your mind. Imagine commenters today arguing whether oat lattes cause flatulence, while roasting the latest #wellness trends. Human nature hasn't evolved that far. You sip your own cup of warmed milk, its aroma grounding you amid the swirl of mockery and highbrow critique. You pause at a particularly elaborate cartoon from the Lantern, depicting a procession of senators and bishops carrying milk boilers instead of scepters, as if the state dairy had supplanted crown and cross. Fringe tidbit: small runs of that cartoon were hand-colored and sold as satirical postcards, mailed to friends with snarky captions like "May your nights be filled with unadulterated dreams." Historians still argue whether these postcards circulated widely enough to influence taste or remained novelties passed among the witty few. You lean back in your chair, the hush of candle flame and the rustle of paper lulling you into that sleep mindset you've cultivated. Modern ASMR comes to mind here. The sensory pleasure arose from leafing through delicate newsprint, hearing the whisper of edges and tasting the milk's sweetness. A tongue-in-cheek aside: if they'd had digital podcasts, Victorian editors might have recorded audio satires of dairy dodgers, complete with creaking milk floats and cynical asides. Turning to a small satirical pamphlet called The Mirror of Milk, you find a series of verses mocking dairy deniers who preferred coffee and brandy to benevolent bovine brews. One couplet sings, "Beware the man who scorns warm creams. He haunts the midnight tavern's gleams. His dreams drip amber bitter brew, while milk's soft clouds he'll never view." The playful rhyme makes you smile, and you imagine reciting it under your breath as you settle into bed. Historians still argue whether these poetic satires provided genuine medical critique or merely indulged in literary whimsy. You spread out a broadsheet cartoon lampooning the Milk Purity Parade, a satirical take on civic processions celebrating the Metropolitan Milk Act's enforcement. Town criers hold placards reading "No starch in our park," while drummers beat out a jaunty march to light joke surfaces. Swap starch for sugar in today's food scares, and you'd get half the internet marching in protest, the other half watching TikToks of cooking fails dart as you gather the newspapers into a neat stack. You feel the gentle weight of history's laughter pressing around you. These caricatures and editorials remind you that every ritual, no matter how well-intentioned, becomes fodder for humor and debate. Yet the very act of parody underscores how central warmed milk had become to Victorian life. It was important enough to satirize endlessly. You rise, the papers rustling like distant applause, and head toward the door as the last flicker of lamplight catches the cartoonist's signature. A simple monogram PB, possibly Philip Bangs, a little-known, the illustrator who specialized in dairy-themed jests. You might never know his full story, but his drawings endure as a window into an era that savored both its milk and its mockery. Stepping back into the corridor's cool hush, you cradle your cup one final time, feeling the warm liquid echo the glow of satirical brilliance. You may have been lampooned, but like any good nightcap, the warmth prevails, reminding you that sleep arrives regardless of what cartoons say. You slip from the light of the drawing room into the quiet hush of a shadowed apothecary lined with glass bottles and labeled vials, where a sweet, heavy odor hangs in the air, part honey, part something more intoxicating. You probably won't survive realizing how Victorian insomnia remedies shifted from humble warm milk to tinctures laced with opiates. Yet here you stand amid rows of laudanum bottles, ready to trace that uneasy transition. You approach a polished mahogany counter, where a stern-faced apothecary weighs a dark amber syrup labeled tinctura opium. Mainstream fact: by the 1880s, laudanum, an alcoholic solution of opium, was among the most commonly prescribed sedatives in Britain. Recommended for everything from teething infants to middle-aged housewives suffering nervous irritability. You watch him measure a small teaspoonful, its viscous surface catching lamplight like molasses. As you lean in, the faint sweetness of anise and alcohol drifts to your nose, mingling with underlying notes of earth and something reminiscent of the tobacco pouches kept in gentlemen's pockets. Fringe tidbit: some quack pharmacists secretly offered laudanum-infused warm milk tonics disguised under innocuous names like Mrs. Featherstone's Night Elixir, claiming that children would never detect the bitter pill oxymoron if cloaked in creamy sweetness. Historians still argue whether these covert concoctions contributed significantly to childhood dependency or remained isolated. Anecdotes and scandal sheets. You lift the little teaspoon to your lips, hesitating as you recall the barley water, honey blends, and spice infusions you've savored, each a gentle nudge toward sleep. The laudanum tastes unexpectedly rich. Warm alcohol coats your tongue before a subtle rush of bitter earthiness follows, like autumn leaves steeped in brandy. A light joke crosses your mind. Today's sleep shots might be jealous of this OG nightcap. Minus the viral hash tied just up behind the counter, the apothecary polishes the neck of a large emerald green bottle embossed with the broad arrow of Her Majesty's Stationery Store's government-issued laudanum was sometimes repackaged for official use. Mainstream fact: laudanum was legally available by prescription until the 1916 Defense of the Realm Act tightened wartime controls, but prior regulations barely restricted sales. So many households kept tinctures in bedside cabinets like tea and sugar. You imagine Victorian nurses ferrying saucers of warm milk and laudanum to patients under exhausted lamps. You step deeper into the apothecary, eyes drawn to a display of circular tin boxers labeled panacea pastilles, small lozenges containing opium and hyoscyamine designed to dissolve in warm milk or tea. Fringe detail: a fringe group of alternative healers claimed that stirring one pastille into milk would release a microdose of sleep dream alkaloids, inducing vivid, restful dreams, though most drinkers reported only a heavy-headed haze and occasional memory lapses. Historians still debate whether such pastilles ever achieved genuine popularity or remained marketing curiosities targeted at the gullible. The apothecary clears his throat and offers you a porcelain bowl of milk, warmed over a spirit lamp, the rim dotted with a few opiate-scented crystals. You cradle the bowl, feeling the warmth seep into your palms, and inhale the mingled scents of dairy and opium. A modern aside stirs in your mind. This is the kind of artisanal fusion that boutique cafes might sell today under a sleek name like Opio Milk Latte if only regulatory boards weren't so strict. Sip. You notice the texture, thicker than plain milk, as though a resolute calm has begun to coat each molecule. Your tongue registers a gentle sweetness at first, followed by a soft burn that unfurls through your chest, loosening tension with chemical precision. You swallow, and the warmth pools beside your heart, an early hint of sedation. A framed notice on the wall cautions against exceeding the recommended dosage, no more than 1 dram per cup, lest you drift into irreversible torpor. Mainstream fact: a dram, approximately 1 teaspoon of laudanum, could contain up to 20 milligrams of morphine, a dosage that modern doctors would consider dangerously high for sleep induction. Yet Victorian physicians often increased prescriptions when patients complained of tolerance, unknowingly accelerating dependence. You reach for a small pamphlet titled The Gentle Art of Sleep. Slipped among the tonic labels, it describes how practitioners gradually weaned patients off laudanum by mixing it with diminishing proportions of warm milk, hoping the comforting ritual would ease withdrawal. Fringe tidbit: some apothecaries claimed success by adding minute drops of digitalis to the final mixtures, invoking a curious synergy of cardiac tonics and opiates. Though skeptics dismiss the practice as life-threatening quackery, historians still argue whether any documented cases attest to such hazardous tapering protocols or if they remain lurid tall tales. You set the empty bowl aside, feeling your eyelids already heavier than mere milk or lavender could muster. The apothecary offers you a final touch: a dab of warm camphor oil on each wrist to ward off residual chills, an aromatic practice said to amplify laudanum's effects. You rub the oil in slow circles, breath-catching as menthol vapors mingle with opium's haze, heightening the sensory drift toward drowsiness. A light joke emerges: if someone recorded this scene today, they'd call it a DIY sleep spa, complete with influencer shout-outs to obscure essential oils and obscure alkaloids. Yet the ritual feels earnest here, born of genuine exhaustion and limited alternatives. As you stand to leave, the apothecary tips his hat and offers a sober warning: use sparingly, or sleep may become all you know. His eyes glint with professional pride and faint concern. You step back into the corridor, lantern light pooling around your boots, mind clouded yet strangely serene. You carry that bowl's warmth down winding hallways, each step echoing softer than the last. The memory of milk's comforting heft now mingles with the chemical lull of laudanum, a dual legacy of Victorian ingenuity and perilous excess. Historians still argue whether laudanum's popularity hastened the decline of ajoled milk tonics or simply layered sedative options for a sleep-starved society. By the time you reach your bedside chamber, the world has narrowed to the hush of shrouded windows and the steady beat of your slowing pulse. You settle beneath the covers, senses muted and thoughts dulled by that curious brew. Whether it was barley water, honeyed milk, or opiate tincture that truly carried you to sleep matters little now, only that the remedy, however potent or precarious, fulfilled its promise. A final thought drifts: might you have preferred the gentle curve of warm milk alone, untainted by chemical allure? Perhaps. Yet here, in the dim glow before dreams, you discover that Victorian nights embraced both simplicity and science, comfort and chemistry, in a single, heavy draught. You step back into the softly lit kitchen where the lingering scent of milk, honey and spice still clings to the air, and you settle at the same backed chair by the hearth, cradling an empty porcelain cup as if it held all the memories of your journey. You probably won't survive realizing how the simple act of warming milk has echoed through centuries to shape the way we drift off tonight. But here you are, ready to reflect on warm milk's enduring legacy in the battle against restless nights. All around you lie the artifacts of that legacy: the brass cradle from our introduction, still faintly scented with lavender, the barley water stains on the oak tabletop, the honey-glazed spoon resting beside a chipped bowl once used in that nursery lullaby. Mainstream fact: warm milk nightcaps remained a staple in British and American households well into the 20th century, even after electric kettles and cocoa blends arrived, testament to the ritual's deep roots in domestic life. You trace a finger along the cup's rim, feeling the ghost of steam that once curled into the lamplight. You recall the donkey's milk session under the moonlit hedge, where Celestine's pale elixir felt both exotic and oddly familiar. Fringe tidbit: a handful of Edwardian skincare lines later marketed donkey's milk face creams, claiming that nightly milk baths and face masks could impart youthful glow as promised by Lady Abernathy's original tonic, though few customers lived long enough to test the theory themselves. Historians still argue whether these cosmetic spin-offs carried any actual benefits or simply capitalized on romantic nostalgia. Your gaze drifts to a small brass thermometer on the mantel, its dual scales echoing Dr. Kellogg's precise 110 degrees Fahrenheit, stirring instructions in the pediatric thermometer from Section 12's nursery. Scholars still debate whether exact temperature controls mattered more than the act of stirring and anticipation itself as the key to trust in the cure. You breathe in the faint sweetness of honey memories and barley echoes, sensing how each sensory cue once primed the mind for surrender. The satirical cartoons you leafed through earlier flash in your mind: punches, overdressed matrons, milk monsters, and the milk purity parade, reminding you that whenever any remedy becomes deeply woven into culture, humor will follow. Yet, the laughter underscores milk's ubiquity, something important enough to lampoon. From genteel drawing rooms to smoky tap, a light joke drifts. Perhaps the ultimate proof of a successful cure is when everyone's gossiping about it over tankets or tea. You recall the mesmerist's crystal rod hovering above that brass basin, and the hush that fell as the audience sipped synchronized milk, half believing in magnetism, half in the milk's innate power. Mainstream fact: after mesmerism's medical discrediting, many hypnotists still encouraged patients to sip warm milk as a prelude to trance, blending spectacle with substance in an early form of what later became guided meditation. You smile at how performance and potion entwined to coax dozens into slumber. In contrast, you remember the apothecary's laudanum-laced milk, its chemical lull smoothing away thought as easily as warm barley or honey. Fringe tidbit: some provincial pharmacies reputedly offered milk chocolate laudanum bars, discreet squares sold under the counter to blissfully numb the senses, though official records never acknowledged their existence. Historians still debate whether these clandestine confections fueled dependence, or were merely the stuff of Gothic legends. You lift your empty cup and turn it slowly in your hands, as though negotiating its final promise of calm. Modern wellness blogs might label this a mindful milk ceremony, yet the Victorians practiced nearly identical rituals without digital fanfare. The simple warmth pooling in your palms, the rising steam carrying invisible suggestions of rest. This remains the heart of the tradition. You imagine your own bedroom steps away, its sheets awaiting, and you savor the quiet hush that follows a proper nightcap. A final mainstream fact: in 1930s Britain, hospitals adopted warm milk doses for post-operative patients, believing it both nutritional and sedative, a medical echo of domestic practice. Warm milk thus bridged home and hospital, comfort and care. As you stand, the oak floorboards sigh beneath your boots. You feel the cumulative weight of countless hands that once held cups like this: farmers, clerks, governesses, aristocrats, nurses, children, all united by the flicker of a lamp and the promise of milk-warmed repose. You realize that whether you stirred lavender into coals, skimmed cream by hand crank, or measured laudanum drops, you were part of a long thread of seekers chasing the same quiet miracle. You nod to the empty room, a silent vow that tomorrow night you too will heat a cup of milk. Follow your favorite ritual, and trust that this humble beverage has earned its place in the nightly arc of ritual and rest. Scholars still argue whether the physiological impact of tryptophan, routine, or cultural belief delivered the real power of sleep tonics. Perhaps the truth blends all three, inseparable like cream melded into milk. In that moment you feel a genuine warmth, not just from a cup but from the fellowship of history's long parade of sleepers. You step toward the door, your footsteps lighter, your mind quieter, carrying the echo of hearth and stable, laboratory and nursery, bathhouse and apothecary, all converging in one simple, enduring cup. The lantern's glow dims as you slip into your bedroom, a final hush settling around you like a soft blanket. You place the empty cup on the bedside table, its ceramic surface cool now. A silent witness to the night's gentle odyssey, your body feels pleasantly weighted, as though milk's warmth has seeped into your bones, carrying away every flicker of tension. You tug the sheets around your shoulders, noting how fabric folds cradle your limbs, inviting each muscle to unwrap into stillness. Outside, the night stirs only with distant rustle of leaves, a lullaby more tender than any human voice. You breathe in slowly, an internal echo of that first sip, and sense the slow rotation of hours ready to carry you into dreams. Thoughts drift perhaps to lavender-scented coal embers, barley grains settling at a cup's bottom, or the delicate hiss of mesmerist magnetism merging with honeyed notes. These recollections weave into each other, layering past onto present, until all that remains is the quiet pulse of your own breath. No need for loud farewells. This is a moment of soft closure. You feel gratitude for the simple, enduring remedy that has cradled generations before you, trusting in warmth and ceremony where science and superstition once mingled. Your heartbeat slows each thrum, a gentle reminder that you are part of a vast, unbroken chain of midnight seekers. As your eyelids flutter like weary wings, the world narrows to the hush between heartbeats, and sleep beckons with a soft refrain. You release one final exhale, letting go of any last wakeful tendrils. The lamp gutters softly, its light retreating into memory. Rest awaits. Sweet dreams.